Chapter 1260. Tushi volunteered to fight not because he thought the 5-star army was easy to bully, but because he was so captivated by the 7-star crossbow that he forgot all the dangers. How could such a small trick escape Tengmushi's sharp eyes? How was he asking to fight? He was clearly trying to steal the credit. He was just spying on the 7-star crossbow. Since that was the case, how could he let such a good thing fall into his opponent's hands? It was true that they were allied forces now, but once the 5-star army was defeated and retreated, they would naturally still be enemies since they were all living in this place. Even if it was for the future, he could not let such a good thing fall into his hands. Cough, General Tushi, you just came from afar and haven't had a good rest. How can you fight now? Without waiting for Tengmushi to finish, Tushi interrupted, how can we rest when dealing with the invading 5-star army? Our Turpan cavalry wants to do our part. I hope old General Teng can fulfill our wish. He even brought out the banner of the Turpan army to pressure Tengmushi. It could be imagined that if he did not let Tushi fight, even if they won this battle, Tushi would probably complain to the 5-star army and point out his faults. Now was not the time to split. The most important thing was that the Big Dipper crossbows were indeed powerful. Someone needed to bear the risk. Seeing Tushi's firm attitude, Tengmushi hesitated for a moment before nodding. Fine. However, according to the ratio, you can only send out 5,000 cavalrymen at most. Too many won't do. 5,000 was a little too little. Based on Tushi's intentions, it would be better if the entire army was mobilized. However, Tengmushi had already made a concession. If he did not agree and angered Tengmushi, he would not even have the chance to send out troops. Tengmushi had no choice but to agree. Alright, 5,000 it is. I will go back and prepare. After Tushi left, Tengmushi took the opportunity to give orders to the other generals. After naming 3 generals and giving each of them 5,000 cavalrymen, a confident smile appeared on his face again. His 15,000 cavalrymen and Tushi's 5,000 cavalrymen made a total of 20,000 cavalrymen, 5 times the number of the enemy. Even if the enemy had a powerful killing weapon like the Big Dipper crossbow, the advantage of numbers was not for nothing. He was confident that the victory of this battle would belong to him. About half an hour later, General Tushi arrived with 5,000 cavalrymen he had personally selected. These were the elites of the 15,000 cavalrymen. He had already instructed them that killing the enemy was secondary. The most important thing was to seize the enemy's crossbow weapons. Whoever seized one would be rewarded with a great merit and would be promoted by 3 ranks and rewarded with 100 taels of silver. Opposite Ili Bailey's army was Tae-Mu-er's regiment, which was personally led by Division Commander Tian-Hu. Tae-Mu had just defeated 5,000 of the enemy's cavalry and killed 2,000 of them. Clearly, he was still not satisfied. At this moment, he saw that the enemy was constantly mobilizing their troops, but no one was rushing out. He said anxiously, Master, why aren't they coming out? Are they really afraid? Of course they are afraid, but they will also come out. We only have 4,000 cavalry. This is why they are confident that they can win. As for why they are not attacking now, it is because they are mobilizing their troops. 1st Regiment Commander, inform the soldiers to check their weapons. The battle is about to begin. Things were as Tian-Hu had guessed. After the 15,000 cavalry from Ibali and the 5,000 cavalry from Tulyafan had gathered, they opened the gates of the main camp and the 20,000 cavalry marched out. From afar, they looked very imposing. If it was any other army with only 4,000 cavalry, they would have been so scared that their legs would have turned to jelly. How could they still talk about fighting? However, when the same thing happened to the soldiers of Ibali's army, their eyes were wide open and filled with murderous intent. They were the strongest cavalry in the world. They had the most powerful weapon in their hands, the 7-star crossbow. This was what they were relying on. So what if the enemy outnumbered them by 5 to 1? In a war, it was not certain who had more people. If that was the case, wouldn't the great Ming Empire already be number 1 in the world? Moreover, These 4,000 cavalrymen were not alone. The other 3 regiments were also on their way. So much time had passed, and they would arrive at any moment. Once the main forces converged, they would no longer be defending, but attacking with all their might. At that time, the world's #1 cavalry division would create another miracle on the battlefield. The 20,000 cavalry of the Allied army leaped out and began to form up in front of the main camp. After all, there were too many people and the distance between the two sides was only 3 li. If they did not form up properly, they would not be able to charge out. Just like that, after the time it took for 2 incense sticks to burn, the 20,000 cavalry formed a fan that was 10 li wide. Just like that, all 20,000 cavalry were sent out of the main camp. After the battle formation was set up, under Tengmushi's orders, the war drums were beaten and the earth shook. Everyone, listen to my orders. In this battle, no one is allowed to retreat before the gong sounds. Otherwise, you will be punished as a traitor. Before charging out, Tengmushi had learned his lesson from the previous incident. He shouted loudly. In his opinion, the most difficult thing to do when facing the 7-star crossbow was to get close to the enemy. Once the two sides started fighting, their advantage in numbers would be displayed to the greatest extent. At that time, victory would belong to them. On the other hand, if everyone retreated, they would never be able to get close to the enemy. They would only become live targets and would not be able to escape the fate of being shot. Only advance and not retreat. This was the order that Tengmushi gave to the 20,000 cavalry. Then, the war drums sounded and the 20,000 cavalry launched a fierce charge on the ground that was 10 li wide. The war horses raised their hooves, kicking up countless snowflakes on the ground. At this moment, the world seemed to have turned into a vast expanse of white. It was so white that tens of meters away became a blind spot. Division Master, the enemy has finally launched an attack. Teimu's face was filled with excitement. Pass down the order. Split into companies and spread out on the same spot. Kill any enemy that tries to get close. At the same time, retreat as you fight. Don't fight head-on. Tian who gave an order. After all, the disparity in numbers was too great. Once the enemy got close to them, it would be the 1st Cavalry Division's misfortune. Yes. Although Teimu also wanted to fight to his heart's content with the enemy, he also knew that the bigger picture was more important. There was no doubt that Tian whose order was the most appropriate at the moment. While the enemy's line of sight was obstructed, they could change their battle formation. Pass down the order. Split into companies and get into a crossbow attack formation. Spread out quickly and retreat as you fight. Don't get close to the enemy. After Teimu gave the order, the well-trained 4,000 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division immediately split into 40 small teams. The distance between each team was not far and the battle line was constantly widening. The Alliance army charging from afar did not know this. They only knew that the enemy was right in front of them. As long as they could charge through the enemy's crossbow formation and engage in close combat, victory would definitely belong to them. Therefore, at this moment, there was only one thought in their minds, and that was to charge. Under the galloping of tens of thousands of horses, the rumbling sound was incessant. It was as if an earthquake was about to happen. The rumbling sound filled the ears of every rider. At this moment, everyone seemed to have forgotten about life and death. They only charged out of instinct. The distance of only 3 miles was nothing to the cavalry. As they got closer and closer to the 5-star army's camp, the sound of crossbow arrows piercing through the air came one after another. With their line of sight obstructed, the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division released their crossbows purely out of instinct. As long as they saw a moving figure rushing towards them, they would pull the trigger. The other soldiers hurriedly reloaded their crossbows when they had the time to ensure that their weapons could continuously attack and kill. Snow swirled in the air and blood splattered everywhere. There was a hint of red in the white, and a hint of white in the red. This was like a painting, a ticket to hell. Amidst the snow, there were only flying crossbow arrows, flashing figures, and the urgent beating of the drums that they had to hear even if they didn't want to hear it. As they madly charged forward, they continuously retreated and released their crossbows, playing the battle song near the Ala mountain pass. How is it? How is it? In the Alliance Army's camp, Tushi was anxiously looking around. Unfortunately, under the heavy snow, he could not see anything. On the other hand, General Tengmuxi, who was not far from him, was obviously much calmer. He only squinted his eyes as he looked at the scene in front of him. General Tengmuxi had been on the battlefield for a long time. He had spent his entire life in blood and fire and was used to seeing big scenes. He had even commanded bigger battles before. However, he did not know why, but at this moment, he was a little flustered. Perhaps it was because he could not see the situation clearly, or perhaps it was because he was afraid and did not understand the 7-star crossbow. As the saying goes, ignorance is the scariest. This is the truth. The battle was still going on. It had already been going on for close to an hour. The army had already gone far away. Other than the heavy snow under the hoofprints, nothing else could be seen. Why does it seem like they are moving towards us? It was unknown which young general said this unintentionally. It was this sentence that attracted everyone's attention. When everyone looked carefully, they discovered that the white snowflakes were indeed moving towards them. What's going on? What's going on? It was still Tushi who was the first to shout. If one listened carefully to his voice, they would be able to feel that at this moment, he was more or less panicking. General Tengmuxi was still squinting his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. After a dozen breaths, when the snowflakes were less than 2 li away from their camp, he suddenly opened his eyes wide and roared, "Not good, immediately close the camp gate, close the camp gate." Chapter 1261. In his nervousness, he shouted twice, but it was still the same order. Even so, the generals and soldiers at the side were still in a daze. They did not know why the old general would give such an order, and no one carried it out. "Bastard, why aren't you closing the gate? The enemy cavalry is coming." Seeing that no one was carrying out his orders, Tengmushi became truly angry. He shouted loudly once again. "Stop it! Stop it!" Not only that, Tengmushi personally rode his horse and rushed to the camp 100 meters away. He reached out his hand to close the wooden gate. As expected of an experienced general, Tengmushi's observation skills were extraordinary. Things were just as he said. The snowballs that were moving over were the main forces of the 1st Heaven Cavalry Division that were approaching from afar. Just a moment ago, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd regiments had finished their respective battles and finally joined forces with the 5th regiment. After a series of crossbow bolts, the cavalry of the Ili army, which had been mostly wiped out by the 5th regiment, was finally defeated. Then, under the command of Division Commander Tian Hu, they charged in the direction of the Ili Cavalry Division's camp. Due to the heavy snowfall, all the soldiers were covered in a layer of white snow, which made it the best camouflage. Even though they were very close to each other, the enemy did not raise any vigilance. If Tengmushi had not been fighting for a lifetime and had a natural insight and judgment on the battlefield, he would not have been able to make such a judgment. Unfortunately, although he had seen through it, because of the lack of time, no one carried out his order. He might as well use his actions to prove everything. General Tengmushi was best at defense, and this camp was run by him like an iron bucket. Once the gate was closed, even if the world's #1 army wanted to enter, they would have to pay a heavy price. Xiao, Tengmushi, who was using all his strength to push the wooden gate, suddenly froze when he heard this sound. Then, blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. An arrow came from afar and hit him in the back. Although it was not fatal, it drained a lot of his strength and injured him. Old General. The scene of Tengmushi standing in front of the wooden door after being hit by the arrow was seen by many people. At this moment, everyone finally regained their senses and understood why the old general had given such an order. However, the best opportunity had already been missed, and it was too late to remedy it now. On the battlefield, any change could directly determine the outcome of the battle. Just like at this moment, when everyone was riding their horses towards the wooden door, a few more crossbow bolts flew through the air. When they were less than 120 steps away, almost all of the bolts hit their targets. Tengmushi's back was like a hedgehog that was pierced by the bolts. His body twitched and stopped several times. Protect the old general. Finally, a fast general and soldier reached Tengmushi's side. They wanted to reach out and pull out the arrow on his back, but they were stopped by Tengmushi, who seemed to have regained consciousness before his death. Don't worry about me. Hurry and retreat. We cannot fight the enemy. You have to think of a way to bring more soldiers back. After exhausting the last of his strength, Tengmushi breathed his last on the spot after saying those words. At this moment, the old general that he had painstakingly invited returned to the earth and was buried in the snow. With Tengmushi's death, the 1st Cavalry Division also rushed to the front of the large tent. Following that, a dense rain of crossbow bolts shot and killed about 300 cavalrymen on the spot, as well as more than 20 high-ranking generals. Watching this scene from 100 meters away, Tushi's expression changed drastically. In his panic, he kept shouting, hold on for me. After shouting these words, he turned and fled. He did not even care about the army and only brought a few dozen of his personal guards to escape from the back of the camp. Tushi was not the only one who fled. Some soldiers who reacted quickly also saw that the 1st Cavalry Division's cavalrymen had already rushed into the large tent. When they saw the sky full of crossbow bolts shooting from afar, and when they saw that the cavalrymen in front of them did not even have the chance to wave their swords before they were killed by the bolts, the entire camp was in chaos. With the death of their general, the morale of the army was completely destroyed. The remaining 35,000 cavalrymen of the Alliance army fled in all directions like stray dogs. At this moment, they only hated the fact that their warhorses only had 4 legs and were running too slowly. Split up and chase. The 2nd Cavalry Division will stay behind to clean up the battlefield. Tian, who rode a tall horse into the camp. When he saw the corpses of the enemy cavalrymen who had died from the crossbow bolts, as well as the captive cavalrymen who had already knelt down and surrendered, he immediately gave the order to fight. The 2nd Cavalry Division's mission was the most important. They had paid the most to deal with the 20,000 Ili cavalrymen north of the Ala mountain pass. At this moment, they naturally had to stay behind to clean up the battlefield. In the 1st Cavalry Division, Tian, whose orders were equivalent to Yang Chendong's orders. No one dared to disobey. Immediately, other than the 1st, 3rd, and 5th Cavalry Divisions that went in 3 different directions to chase after the enemy, the only ones left in the camp were the 2nd Cavalry Division's soldiers, the captives, and the corpses of the Alliance army. Of course, because they had been defeated too quickly and too hastily, the Ili army's money, rations, and weapons were all left in the camp for future translocations. When the 2nd Cavalry Division's 2nd Cavalry Division's Lu Duo saw the large storehouse, he excitedly came to Tiger's Mane. Division Commander, the money, rations, and supplies are all here. We did not lose anything. These things are enough for our division to eat for a year. Good, send the report of victory to the 6th young master. At the same time, ask for instructions on what to do with these spoils. Tian, whose face was filled with satisfaction. With the help of the Big Dipper crossbow, they had made a name for themselves as the #1 cavalry division in the world. From now on, whenever they mentioned their army, their enemies would be afraid of them. The heavy snow still showed no signs of stopping. The 5-star army used the heavy snow to achieve their goal of surprise attack. At the same time, many of the Alliance army's cavalrymen also used the heavy snow to escape. The heavy snow quickly covered the tracks of their fleeing horses, so the pursuit was not too smooth. Even so, when the final results were tallied, they still managed to kill more than 13,000 enemies and capture 40,000 enemies. This meant that out of the 95,000 enemies, not even half of them had escaped. Among them, more than 30,000 of the Ili army had escaped, more than 10,000 of the Turpan cavalry had escaped, and the rest were either stragglers or deserters whose whereabouts were unknown. When the telegram was sent to Yang Qindong, who was in the Turpan Palace, he couldn't help but laugh. Not bad, Tian who didn't let me down, and the 1st Cavalry Division didn't let me down either. Reply, the 1st Cavalry Division has collectively achieved first-class merit. Order them to be on standby and wait for the rear army to take over. Yes. Beta Persei, who was standing at the side, excitedly replied, then turned around and strode away. Yang Qindong, who was left behind, looked in the direction of the tower outside the palace and muttered in his heart, "Bullshit 5-star army, I'm fighting the Alliance army." On the tower outside the city, the siege continued. It was personally led by Hikagen, who had his nose dug out by the 5-star army. It seemed that he wanted to take revenge for the humiliation of that day. Under his organization, the momentum of the siege was very fierce. Often, when a 1,000-man team was beaten back, another 1,000-man team would take their place and charge forward. They had been fighting for half a month, and the 10,000 infantrymen in his hands had been used up. Now, the ones charging were the 5-star army, which had changed from cavalry to infantry. It seemed that everyone knew what it meant to take down Turpan City. Each country took out 5,000 soldiers, who had changed from cavalry to infantry, and handed them over to Hikagen to command. This made the siege even more fierce. Not only that, Yeshen also used all the cannons he had obtained over the years, either by robbing or buying. They gathered them together and attacked the West Tower fiercely, as if they wanted to destroy the city. The Baiming army's cannons were naturally not as powerful as Yang Qindong's cannons, but their power was not to be underestimated. The bombardment that had been going on since yesterday had indeed caused a lot of pressure and damage to the defense of Turpan City. When Beta Persei heard the sound of the cannons, he personally went to the tower. After seeing that many of the walls had been blown open, his face was full of worry. This won't do. If this goes on, it's only a matter of time before the city falls. For the sake of the young master's safety, I have to force it. Beta Persei, who had gone down the tower, had already made up his mind. He must take Yang Qindong away from here. He believed that with nearly 20,000 Mongolian cavalry and 2,000 strong black cavalry, if they suddenly attacked at this time, there was still a high chance that they could escape. As long as the young master was fine, even if they lost Turpan City, what was the big deal? Beta Persei, who had made up his mind, first went to find General Song and the Black Cavalry's 1st Brigade leader Qiu Vi and 2nd Brigade leader Dao Xiao. The 4 of them quickly came to a consensus and then went to the palace. When they arrived at the palace, they could not find Yang Qindong. After asking some people, they found out that Bugnam of Gojoseon was in the back room. Let's go to the back room. After Beta Persei asked for the location, he went to the back room with everyone. When they arrived, they saw the Black Cavalry's 1st Brigade Deputy Brigade Leader Ba Daojiang commanding the people to carry something out of the back room. What's going on? Beta Persei and the others still did not see Yang Qindong and could not help but ask in confusion. Oh, the 6th young master is commanding everyone to carry the cannons outside. Ha! At this moment, Ba Daojiang's face was filled with an excited smile. At this moment, a gust of wind blew by and blew a piece of black cloth off, revealing the pitch-black 100 mm mortar underneath. Chapter 1262. Artillery, it's a 100 mm mortar. As the 2 captains of the Black Cavalry, Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao were naturally very familiar with such things. Beta Persei, the 6th young master is calling for you. Peng Yu, the captain of the 1st squad, walked through the Black Cavalry and arrived in front of Beta Persei with a trace of respect on his face. At this moment, Beta Persei was also confused. He didn't remember when there were any artillery in this warehouse, but these things really did appear. What's going on? With extreme puzzlement, Beta Persei followed behind Peng Yu and walked into the warehouse. Behind him, Qiu Vi, Dao Xiao, Na Song and the others couldn't help but shake their heads. Second brother, what are you doing? We also have artillery, many times more advanced than the enemy. What are you nervous about? That's right, that's right. Come on, let's continue to defend the city and wait for the artillery to be ready. Let's give the enemy a good look, ha ha ha. The three officers with the rank of senior colonel laughed and left without waiting for Beta Persei to return. At this time, in the warehouse, Beta Persei was listening to Yang Qindong's teachings. Not bad, Beta Persei. This time, you and Yang Si are well prepared. You knew to bring some artillery to the city in advance. Although there are only 2, the number of shells is really enough. You guys have done a good job. When Yang Qindong saw Beta Persei appear with a confused look, he didn't wait for the other party to speak and spoke first. After saying this, Yang Qindong still didn't give Beta Persei a chance to ask questions and continued, with these 2 100mm mortars, it shouldn't be a problem to deal with the artillery outside the city. Well, I know you really want to shoot the artillery, so I'll leave this task to you. You don't have any other questions, do you? This so-called other question naturally referred to why the cannons appeared here. Beta Persei had been by Yang Qindong's side for the longest time. He didn't learn anything else, but he had picked up some intelligence. He immediately understood the meaning behind Zhang Heng's words. Although he was also very puzzled as to how these cannons appeared here, he couldn't stop the excitement of wanting to shoot them. He immediately nodded and agreed. Young master, these 2 cannons were indeed transported all the way here after I contacted Yang Si. It's just that I forgot about it because of the urgency of the war. Please punish me. No man is a saint. How can there be no mistakes? Alright, I forgive you. Go and fiddle with your cannons. Remember, don't waste a single shell. Knowing that Beta Persei understood the meaning of his words, Yang Qindong chuckled and waved his hand. Beta Persei left excitedly. To him, it didn't matter how the cannons appeared here. Speaking of which, how many miracles did the 6th young master bring to him? What he was more excited and looking forward to now was the opportunity to shoot the artillery. As soon as the sound of the artillery was heard, the enemy would be dizzy. Seeing Beta Persei leave excitedly, Yang Qindong let out a sigh of relief. He had no choice but to take out 2 100mm mortars from the large warehouse. Otherwise, it would be impossible for them to defend Tulyifan city. Fortunately, Beta Persei was not an outsider. Although he would have some guesses after doing this, he would never speak carelessly. Yang Qindong was still confident about this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have kept this person by his side for so long. With Beta Persei standing up for him, no one would doubt the origin of these cannons. He could also breathe a sigh of relief and return to the palace to take care of the formation. As for whether the appearance of the 100mm mortars would reverse the situation, Yang Qindong was not worried at all. If he couldn't defend Turpan city even after taking out such a trump card, he might as well stop the expansion and immediately return to Qiqian city to retire. Outside Turpan city, the scene of artillery fire was still raging. When they saw pieces of the city wall peeling off as the cannons fired, the generals of the Five-Nation Coalition laughed heartily. Originally, it should have been easy to take down Turpan city, which was only guarded by 20,000 cavalry. They had the advantage of military strength, plus the people in the city knew that they were coming, so they should have responded. Under internal and external troubles, Kagan gave him 3 days at the earliest. He was confident that he would be able to take down Turpan city in 3 days at the latest. But when it came to fighting, it was completely different. At some point, many young men in civilian clothes suddenly appeared on the city gate tower. They actually raised pillows, pushed boulders, and splashed kerosene to counterattack. At first, Kagan wanted to stop the attack. He thought that the people were forced to do so by the 5-star army. He shouted loudly, telling the people not to listen to the 5-star army. He even urged them to open the city gate from the inside and let them in. However, such shouts were quickly suppressed by the bows and arrows of the Mongolian soldiers led by Narisong. If it wasn't for the distance, one of the arrows could have hit Kagan. This angered the other party. Kagan loudly shouted that these people were fools. He also said that once the city was breached, he would teach these people a lesson for helping the 5-star army defend the city. This was like poking a hornet's nest. Originally, the people only worked for the sake of money, but now they had no choice but to fight for themselves. Perhaps after the city tower was breached, the people who helped to defend the city might not be exterminated. However, there was one thing that could not be changed, and that was that the money they had received would be taken back. How could they give back what they had received? Just based on this, the benefits of these people were completely tied to the 5-star army. At this moment, they had no other choice. They could only fight to the death. When they saw the enemy's cannons continuously bombarding the city gate tower, the destruction was extremely great. The skin of the city walls was peeling off, and a hole was about to be blasted open. Many of the people defending the city became nervous. Right now, they were just like the 5-star army. In fact, they were even more anxious than the 5-star army. This was because once the city gate was breached, the 5-star army could still charge out. However, they would not even have the chance to escape. Thus, many of the people went to the palace together. They were prepared to petition Bugnam of Gojoseon and ask him to protect the city. For this, these people were willing to do their best. On their way forward, they happened to see young heir and the others carrying 2 pitch-black iron objects, as well as several large wooden chests, out of the city. "What are you doing?" Seeing so many people blocking the way, and most of them were young men, Beta Persei frowned slightly. With a wave of his right hand, the 500 black cavalry immediately spread out in a defensive formation. These 2 cannons and 20 boxes of ammunition were treasures in Beta Persei's eyes. He would never allow anyone to have any ideas about them. The murderous aura of the black cavalry immediately shocked the people on the opposite side. They were all at a loss for what to do and some didn't know what to do. Fortunately, there were still some bold people in the crowd, such as the young man Tumu who had repeatedly performed well. He wasn't so scared that he didn't dare to make a sound, but his voice wasn't very loud either. "General, what are you doing? Don't worry about what we're doing. Let me ask, what are you doing? You're called Tumu, right? I'll let you say it." Beta Persei still remembered this young Turpan man who had performed well on the first day and immediately pointed to him. Now that he had a chance to speak, Tumu told the truth. "General, the city is in danger. We want to petition Bugnam of Gojoseon and ask him to send troops to defend the city." Hearing that they wanted to petition to defend the city and not have any ideas about his cannons, Beta Persei's expression immediately became much better. "Oh, so that's what you mean. Okay, then you don't have to go. Didn't you ask us what we were doing just now? Then I can answer you now. Do you see what we're moving? These are cannons, specially used to help everyone defend the city." Cannons? They're so small. Although Beta Persei's words were very confident, in the eyes of these young people, they were not very optimistic. They had seen the cannons of the 5-nation coalition army on the city tower before. Each one was bigger than the other, and their power was so amazing. The 2 cannons in front of them were so small that 2 people could carry them. They really couldn't imagine how powerful they could be. At this moment, Beta Persei didn't know whether to cry or laugh at being underestimated. Okay, there's no need to explain anything to you now. Just watch our actual actions in a while. Come on, let's move on. Some things could not be described with words, just like the power of a 100mm mortar. But Beta Persei believed that once the cannons were fired, the power they emitted would definitely shock everyone. At that time, facts would be more effective than 1,000 words. Beta Persei said so confidently that the people could only follow behind him, regardless of whether they believed it or not. They soon arrived at the West City Gate, then began to set up the cannons and adjust the cannon ruler. Beta Persei personally did the work of adjusting the cannon ruler. He was one of Yang Qindong's direct disciples. He really put a lot of effort into it. Now was the time to put it into practice. How could he let others do it? Everyone looked on helplessly as young heir stretched out his thumb and measured the direction of the wind. He was so busy that he couldn't be happier. At the Walla artillery position outside the West City Gate, all 100 cannons were placed here at the moment. It was obvious that Yeshen was going all out to take down Turpan City. In his opinion, this was an excellent opportunity to capture Yang Qindong alive. He would never miss it. Chapter 1263. In order to prevent the enemy from abandoning the city and fleeing, under his coordination, every gate of the city was guarded by the cavalry of the 5 allied nations. This was to ensure that the 5-star army would either not leave the city, or once they left the city, they would be stopped and intercepted by the strongest forces. Yang Qindong, oh Yang Qindong, let's see where you can escape to this time. Continue to fire the cannons. Blast them to death. Yeshen rode on his horse, his voice carrying a murderous aura, but his face was full of joy. It was obvious that he was very satisfied with the current situation. Just like how Yang Qindong was sent to rescue the 1st Cavalry Division at the Ayla Mountain Pass, Yeshen's move of sending his 100,000 troops was not just to defeat the 5-star army. Can't he see that Yang Qindong is dividing the combat power of the 5-star army? But he did it anyway, so that he could surround Turpan and give himself a chance to take the head of the general in the midst of an army of 10,000. Now that the opportunity was about to present itself, how could he not be excited? How could he not be excited? How could he not be happy? The cannons were still firing. Due to some quality issues, more than 10 of the 100 cannons had been turned into duds, and a dozen more were about to come to an end. However, he didn't care about these things. All he wanted was to take down Turpan City and kill Yang Qindong. Of course, it would be best if he could capture him alive. He could probably exchange this person for a lot of good things that he wanted. At that time, without the 5-star army holding him back, he would be invincible on the grasslands once again. It was unknown what he thought of, but a smile flashed across his face. At this moment, he also had the potential to become a mental patient, to the extent that when the deputy generals at his side saw this appearance, they unknowingly distanced themselves a bit, each of them carrying a cautious expression on their faces. Inside the city, after a series of operations, Yang Air was ready to fire the cannons. He chuckled and waved at the Black Knight Dragon guards not far away. Come on, bring me a box of cannonballs. These were the treasures of the 5-star army. Due to the lack of technology and raw materials, the production of cannonballs had always been extremely complicated. It was already considered good if 2 or 3 out of 10 cannonballs were up to standard. There might even be some duds, which was something that couldn't be bought with money. This was also one of the main reasons why the 5-star army had to increase the number of cavalry units. Once cannonballs could be used freely one day, it would be much easier for them to fight battles. There were 6 cannonballs in one box, a total of 10 boxes. Looking at the golden cannonballs, Beta Persei had a dazed look on his face. Brothers, it's up to you. Don't let them be duds. Of course, Beta Persei did not know that these were all taken out by Yang Qindong from the big warehouse. There was no problem with their quality, and it was even more impossible for them to be duds. Fire! Under Beta Persei's shout, the cannonball was loaded into the barrel. Then, with a long whistle, a seemingly invisible flame rushed out of the barrel and shot towards the Walla army's artillery positions outside the city. Compared to the beaming red barbarian cannons that could only hit 200 to 300 meters away, the mortar cannons had a range that could kill the enemy in minutes. It was like a knife versus a pair of scissors. They were not on the same level at all. The Walla artillery positions outside the city were surrounded by majestic Walla cavalry. Considering the power of the cannons and the threat they posed to Turpan's towers, Yeshen ordered more than once that they had to be on high alert. They had to be constantly on guard against the 5-star army's cavalry rushing out. Once this place was destroyed, they would lose a very important trump card. Therefore, those who were assigned to stand guard here were all elite veterans with eagle eyes, the strength of a bear, and the morale of a tiger. But even if they were powerful cavalry, in the face of the cannons falling from the sky, they had no effect at all. The so-called defense was just like paper. When the cannonball fell, they didn't even have time to react or dodge. Because no one thought that there would be cannons in Turpan, and they didn't even know how much more advanced they had. Whoosh, boom. The cannonball fell from the sky and accurately landed in the center of the red barbarian cannons. With a deafening sound, the cannons at the landing point were immediately sent flying into the air. When they fell to the ground, they had already become a pile of scrap metal. The explosion quickly formed a large pothole. The snow on the ground, the stones on the ground, and the soil on the ground were also lifted up, flying in all directions and exploding. Some of the Walla cavalry that were closer were also unlucky and fell to the ground. They were blown away by the shockwave. A rumbling sound echoed in his ears and woke up Yes-Hen, who was still dreaming. His hands trembled and he almost fell off his horse. After he finally calmed himself down, he asked anxiously, "What's going on? Did the cannons explode?" In the past, there were red barbarian cannons. Because of the quality of the cannons, they suddenly exploded and injured a few cavalry. So he instinctively thought in this direction. Leader, it wasn't an explosion. The cannons fired by the 5-star army landed in the center of the red barbarian cannons. We lost 6 cannons in an instant. A general in charge of the safety of the cannons ran in front of Yes-Hen with a bitter face. His duty was to protect the safety of the cannons, but he could only defend against the cannons on the ground. His main duty was to prevent the 5-star army cavalry from charging out of the city. He didn't expect to be able to defend against the cannonballs falling from the sky. That was definitely not the area they could defend against. Looking at the general's crying face, Yes-Hen asked in shock, "What? You said the 5-star army also has cannons? How is that possible?" Yes-Hen instinctively shouted this sentence. In his opinion, if the 5-star army really had cannons, they would have used them a long time ago. Why would they wait until now? But thinking about it, weren't firearms one of the most important reasons why the 5-star army was so strong? Since he could get his hands on 100 red barbarian cannons, how could the enemy not have them? In his heart, he hated Yang Qindong's calmness. Only now did he take out the cannons and use them. He really could keep his composure. But because of this, he was even more happy as he analyzed, looks like the 5-star army is really at their wits' end. They even used cannons. Looks like this is their last resort. This way, they won't have too many cannons. Find the location of the enemy's cannons and destroy them. When that time comes, let's see how they will fight against us. Yes-Hen believed that Turpan's defense had reached its most critical point. If not, they wouldn't have used their trump card, the cannons. Because of this, he concluded that the defense had reached its most critical point. Now, it was up to them to destroy the enemy's cannons and regain the initiative. That's right, the 5-star army only had 2 cannons. Compared to the number of cannons, it was a lot less. However, the quality of the cannons was much higher. They were small, accurate, powerful, and had a long range. How could Baiming's clumsy red barbarian cannons compare to them? The so-called cannon general listened to Yeshen's order and his face became even more bitter. He wanted to say that he didn't see the location of the 5-star army's cannons. He only heard the sound and his cannons were seriously damaged. He didn't even see the enemy's shadow at all. But he didn't dare to say these words because he found that Yes-Hen was already in a rage. If he dared to say this at this time, he was afraid that he would die before the cannons were destroyed. "Yes, I will try my best." He didn't say anything, but he had to obey. The cannon general agreed and rushed towards the cannons again. At this time, in Turpan, the observation soldiers on the city gate tower had already passed on the news that 6 of the enemy's cannons were destroyed in one shot. It immediately caused a burst of exclamations and shouts of excitement from the crowd. Seeing how excited the people around him were, and how they were looking at him with envy and admiration, Yang Er's heart was filled with joy. "Come, I'll show everyone the power of our cannons again." Whoosh, boom. Whoosh whoosh, boom boom boom. As if it was smooth sailing, golden cannonballs blasted out and landed on Yeshen's cannons. The cannons that couldn't find their opponents in time became fixed targets and were quickly hit one by one. One of the cannonballs unfortunately fell on the ammunition box next to the cannons and immediately caused a second explosion. The destruction caused in that instant destroyed the remaining beaming red barbarian cannons. Not only that, dozens of cavalrymen around were not much better. They were injured by iron shrapnel and fell off their horses one by one. The cannons became a sea of fire, and then became a ruin. Without the support of the cannons, the siege couldn't help but stagnate. More young men and women of Turpan rushed up the city gate tower again, using the advantage of the high ground to launch a strong counterattack. "What's going on?" He Qi asked the others to command in his place, then came in front of Yeshen and asked aloud. There was no need for an answer. Just by looking at the sea of fire that was still burning, it was clear at a glance. Are the cannons of the 5-star army that powerful? Did anyone see where they came from? Will they still fire at us? In a short period of time, He Qi asked 3 consecutive questions. The first question naturally didn't need to be answered. Facts spoke louder than words. The second question was basically answered. The cannons came from within the city. Just from this point alone, the attack range of the 5-star army's cannons couldn't be compared to the destroyed red barbarian cannons in their hands. As for the third question, no one could answer. Perhaps only Yang Qindong knew whether the 5-star army would fire or not. Chapter 1264. He Kagan's expression turned ugly when he didn't receive any news. He originally thought that victory was in the bag. With the addition of the cannons, he was even more certain of victory. However, as the 5-star army started using cannons, the outcome became uncertain. Why don't we retreat first? This Turpan city is a tough nut to crack. Why don't we find a chance to fight them on the plains? After a short moment of silence, Kazakhstan's Kale tentatively expressed his opinion. He had already received information that an elite force of the 5-star army was approaching Turpan city. At the same time, the battle at the Ayla mountain pass that was previously agreed upon did not seem to be going well. This made him realize how strong the enemy was. No wonder they needed the 5-star army to fight. Of course, if Kale knew that the so-called battle was already in name only. Apart from the 100,000 Walla army that could still hold on, the other 3 armies had already been defeated, he probably wouldn't have asked this tentatively. Instead, he would have made this suggestion without hesitation. After all, they had worked so hard for so long. Moreover, after the bombardment of Turpan city, there were indeed some areas that were in danger of collapsing. It would be a pity to give up now. In the end, He Kagan, who had an extreme personality, or perhaps it was more accurate to say that he hated the 5-star army to the bone, made the final decision. Continue to attack. Attack for 3 more days. If it still doesn't work, then we can retreat. After working so hard for so long and seeing that success was at hand, he was unwilling to retreat now. Because of this, he thoroughly hated the citizens of Turpan. This was because he had already discovered that it was these citizens, especially some young and strong men, who had climbed up the city walls. There were also some retired soldiers who helped to defend the city. This was why his attack was stopped and he couldn't succeed. This was the benefit of Yang Qindong using money to buy people. If it was said that in the beginning, they were working for the 5-star army for money, then now it was for themselves. These days, whether it was those who died in battle, those who were injured, or those who were still defending the city, they had saved up a large amount of silver. Even if it was just for this money, they had to defend Turpan city well and not let the 5 allied armies come in and snatch the fruits of their victory. At this moment, in Turpan city, a group of people were cheering loudly, all of them revealing radiant and sincere smiles. Originally, they were worried that the Walla army's cannons would pose a threat to them, but when the 5-star army took out their cannons, they finally witnessed the power of cannons. They were more confident in defending the city, and naturally, they were more confident in protecting their own property. Seeing how powerful the cannons of the 5-star army were, many citizens couldn't help but suggest excitedly, "Why don't we fire these cannons into the enemy's camp? That way, we won't have to do anything and the city will be completely defended, right?" "No. Hearing that someone was thinking about the cannons, Beta Persei immediately gave a decisive refusal. For him, these cannonballs were like the roots of his life. Although shooting them out now could cause chaos in the 5 countries' coalition forces and solve the crisis of the city being besieged, this was not the young master's intention. In his opinion, it should not be the right time. Since Yang Qindong didn't have this intention, how could Beta Persei make a decision on his own? Everything was still waiting for the order to be given. As the saying goes, good steel should be used on the blade. The cannons finally stopped firing. Yes Hen wanted to use the cannons because they were all blown up, so he couldn't use them anymore. The 5-star army deliberately held back. Yes Hen and the others didn't know about this. After watching the cannons being razed to the ground, he led the cavalry out of the camp and stood scattered outside the city. Because he wasn't sure if the other side would bombard the barracks. If so, how could they fight this battle if they couldn't even see the shadow of the enemy's cannons? Yes Hen was even ready to retreat at any time. But after waiting for more than an hour, he didn't hear the sound of cannons. His originally fearful face slowly calmed down. It seems that the 5-star army doesn't have a lot of cannons. That's good, there's a possibility to continue fighting. Beta Persei regarded the cannons as his lifeblood, which caused Yes Hen to misunderstand. This also meant that they were destined to receive a bloody lesson soon. Without the addition of cannons on both sides, the war returned to normal, and the siege of the city continued with cold weapons. With the support of the 40,000 strong men in Turpan, it wasn't that easy for the 5 Alliance army, which didn't have much military strength, to break through. For a time, both sides fell into a deadlock. Also in a stalemate was Walla's 90,000 strong army and the 5-star army's cavalry. Bo Mu brought 70,000 troops and logistics to the vanguard camp. After meeting up with them, he knew everything that had happened. Regarding the fact that he couldn't break through the defensive formation of the 5-star army, nor could he rescue the 10,000 Turpan cavalrymen led by Erifu, who had tipped them off, Bo Mu didn't feel any guilt. This wasn't part of the battle plan, and he had no obligation to save them. On the contrary, Bo Mu was distressed by the loss of 6,500 cavalry in the first battle. The original Vala army was very powerful, and even the great Khan Tuachuo Buhua had fallen under their blades. But ever since Yang Qindong suddenly appeared and the 5-star army entered the grasslands, the situation immediately changed. The Wala army lost every battle they fought, and their losses were reduced. Now that they didn't even have a place to stand, wanting to replenish their manpower became an extremely extravagant matter. This was why every single fighting force in the camp was so precious. Meanwhile, just a single attack actually cost them 6,500 cavalry. This was truly something Bo Mu didn't expect, and it also made him understand even more clearly how terrifying the 5-star army was. Even though he had 90,000 cavalry in his hands, according to the information from the scouts, the 5-star army didn't even have 50,000 men. With the advantage in numbers, he had confidence in beating back the 5-star army in a frontal battle. However, the consequences of doing so would undoubtedly be great. The best result would be a heavy blow to the 5-star army's cavalry, making the other side lose 50,000 men. Compared to the disastrous losses he would suffer in the end, this kind of result was clearly not what Bo Mu wanted to see. In comparison, the 5-star army was clearly much more valiant. They had an extremely stable rear, and an extremely stable source of recruits. However, losing 50,000 men wasn't a big deal at all. This was the benefit of having a strong rear. It was a pity that even though he could clearly see all of this, Yes Hen just couldn't learn it. He didn't understand production at all, nor did he know how to manage the people's hearts. Even if he was given a territory, it would only give him a fixed goal. He definitely wouldn't be able to become like Yang Qindong, expanding his influence and stabilizing it. Perhaps this was the difference between them. The starting point was completely different, and it would directly lead to a completely different outcome. We can't fight head-on. After a sigh, Bo Mu made an extremely helpless decision. Then are we just going to watch the 5-star army run wild in front of us like this? Bian Qing, who had just suffered a defeat, had an expression of unwillingness on his face. Let's wait a little longer. He didn't take the initiative to answer this question, instead choosing to evade it. Bo Mu wanted to report the situation here to leader Yes Hen, who was at the foot of Turpan, and wait for the final result. Now that both the Yirqiang and Turpan cavalry had been defeated, it seemed like this battle was already over before it even started. However, it wasn't that there wasn't any hope. For example, there were still 80,000 Ili cavalry at the Ala mountain pass. Perhaps that would become a new counterattack point. If they could deal with the surrounded 1st Cavalry Division and continue east, they could try to launch a pincer attack on both sides. It wasn't that Bo Mu was stupid to place his hopes on the 80,000 Ili cavalry, but it was because of the lack of information. It could be imagined that if he already knew that his allies had been defeated, and had been defeated so miserably, he probably wouldn't continue to wait here. He might even turn around and flee without asking for permission from Yes Hen. Bo Mu needed to ask for permission, and he still had a trace of hope in his heart. However, he didn't know that the 30,000 soldiers of the foreign race's 1st Army were currently rushing over from the northeast. In order to completely resolve the situation in the Ili region, Yang Qindong had adopted the method of continuously recruiting soldiers. This first batch of soldiers had already been sent over, totaling over 100,000 men. Apart from the 2nd Army, which was protecting the first batch of 300,000 civilians, the target of the 5 new armies was the besieged Turpan city, while the 1st Army's target was Yeshen's 100,000 cavalry. As a former division commander, Su Kuda had commanded over 30,000 soldiers at his peak. Compared to his current position as a commander, he wasn't much inferior. With this experience, he didn't feel uncomfortable being a commander. Instead, he quickly adapted to the role. This time, after receiving the telegram order, he hurried over as soon as he left the 8-mile city. The heavy snow also affected the marching speed of the 1st Army of the non-humankind. After the snow covered the legs of the horses, the marching speed dropped to the lowest point. Seeing that it was getting closer and closer to the time when the order was given, an anxious look flashed across the face of Commander Su Qingda. If they couldn't reach the assembly point on time, it would be tantamount to disobeying orders. At that time, could he still use the weather as an excuse? Although he was already a military commander, he was still only a senior colonel. Why was that? Wasn't it because he hadn't fought a good battle? How could he convince the masses? Chapter 1265. I don't care anymore. Increase the speed. Hurry up. Seeing that the snow showed no signs of stopping, it was only a little lighter than before. However, it was still snowing heavily. Su Kuda had no choice but to order the army to increase their speed. Perhaps this was because he rarely saw heavy snow in his living environment. He couldn't find a solution in such a harsh environment. When Sensei Naganabu, the commander of the 103rd Division, took the initiative to report the situation to him, he didn't even see him. Just another commander who came to dissuade me from marching carefully. With a military order in front of me, how can I be stingy with the horses? I don't want to see them all. In the past few days, more than one person had told him that marching in such heavy snow was a great burden on the soldiers and horses. Under such circumstances, even if they reached the designated location, they wouldn't be able to launch an attack. It was better to explain the situation to Bugnam of Gojoseon and then proceed to the destination while preserving their strength. It was because of this that Su Kuda didn't want to see his commander. Of course, this also had a lot to do with the prejudice in his heart. Sensei Naganabu was a citizen of the Japanese Empire. He didn't have a good impression of this race that repeatedly offended the Great Han Empire. Naturally, he wouldn't like to see them. But because of his actions, Sensei Naganabu, who came to give the suggestion, was rebuffed. Because of this, he couldn't come up with a good idea, which affected the speed of the army gathering. In the end, Walla's 100,000 cavalry managed to escape the disaster. Seeing that his commander was blocked, Sensei Naganabu could only helplessly return to his division. Living in the Japanese Empire, he was used to seeing heavy snow. Originally, he had his own method, for example, the progressive method. In other words, today, one division would be in charge of the road. This was of course very hard work, but it didn't matter. The next day, another division would be in charge of the road. By repeating this, 1 day of work and 3 days of rest would be created. This way, they could create a path for the army to walk on. Their speed would also increase a lot. Sukuda didn't even want to see him, so what could he do? He wanted to use this method himself, but without a military order, his 103rd Division couldn't go past the 101st and 102nd Divisions to act as the vanguard. Otherwise, it would be a huge crime to move troops without orders. Sensei Naganabu shook his head helplessly and gave up. On the other hand, the new 5 armies that were marching towards Turpan from 8 Mile City were much faster. They were using the method that Sensei Naganabu had in mind. One army had 4 divisions, and they were advancing in a progressive manner. Although their speed was not fast enough due to the heavy snow, it was much faster than just having one division clear the way and giving each division time to rest. Commander Shi Wanshan was in the Wan-Al department all year round, and it often snowed there. Naturally, he already had a plan for how to travel in the snow. Under his lead, the new 5 armies quickly approached Turpan City. Not far to the north, the 3rd and 4th divisions of the 4th division were also running under the lead of Ling Dechang. The snow was too heavy, and Ling Dechang gave up on the bicycle in his hands. After leaving a company to guard the area, he led the rest of the cold vanguard warriors to advance on foot. If it was on flat ground, walking was naturally faster than a warhorse. However, under the heavy snow, it was a completely different story. Many times, a single person's speed was even faster. Especially those who were able to become the cold vanguard warriors, which one of them didn't have good military qualifications. Their speed wasn't bad at all. Ling Dechang led more than 4,000 soldiers to change their pace. This made the Vara and Kazakh cavalry, who were in charge of following and pinning them down, extremely anxious. The heavy snow was also a huge obstacle for them. Coupled with the occasional gust of wind, they actually lost track of the cold vanguard warriors. The 4th division was nowhere to be seen. Because of this, Chao Lu and Gu Lijiang, who were leading the troops, were naturally extremely anxious. After trying all sorts of methods to no avail, they had no choice but to make a decision that they were unwilling to make. That was to report the situation back. Although they would be reprimanded for doing so, this was an important matter, and they couldn't afford to play any tricks. Under the heavy snow, even the speed of the scouts and messengers was greatly affected. What these people in charge of relaying the orders didn't know was that their target, the 2nd Division, was already in front of them. Under the heavy snow, a strong gust of wind blew. In this weather where even wild beasts were unwilling to come out to look for food, there was a group of soldiers who were persevering through the snow. They held the shovels on their bodies and continued to dig. Even though the newly dug path would soon be buried by the heavy snow under the strong winds, they still worked hard to move their arms, just to create an easier path for the warriors behind them to move forward. 2nd Company has already persisted for half an hour. It's time for 3rd Company to take over. Within the group, the 3rd Company's regiment commander in charge of leading the charge shouted loudly. A group of 100 soldiers rushed forward and replaced the 2nd Company brothers in charge of clearing the path. The army continued to advance. It was with such perseverance that the 4th Division was worthy of the title, Cold Front. They shook off their pursuers on both sides and approached Turpan City step by step. They came together with the new 5 armies. They reported their positions through telegrams, and Yang Qindong naturally knew all this like the back of his hand, but the 5-nation coalition was still kept in the dark. It was said that time was money. It was the same principle on the battlefield. News and intelligence had a time limit, and whoever was slower by half a beat would lose the initiative and even get beaten up. Yes Hen and the other generals were completely unaware of this crisis. They were still hoping that they could take Turpan City and capture Yang Qindong alive to change the situation in one fell swoop. They didn't know that the army they had sent to intercept them had been obstructed by the heavy snow and couldn't send out a warning. They had agreed to fight for 3 more days, and today was the last day. The 5-star army and Turpan citizens on the city walls were about to fall, but every time a soldier risked his life to charge up the walls, he would be beaten back down and sent flying into the dust. What the 5 armies didn't expect was that in the afternoon, a scout suddenly came from afar and told them that Yi Erqiang and Turpan's army had been defeated at the Ala mountain pass. Although Ili hadn't sent back the news of the 80,000 soldiers' defeat, it was enough to shake the morale of the soldiers. They couldn't remain as calm as before. "We can't fight anymore." Yi Ligua and General Kagan, whose eyes were bloodshot, finally said helplessly after the sun had set. The 10,000 infantrymen he had brought with him had all been used up, and only 3,000 of his cavalry were left. The other 4 armies also suffered some losses, but they still couldn't take Turpan city. As the main attacking general, he couldn't help but admit that this path wasn't going to work. "Why don't we try another day?" In the tent of the 5 Nations Army, the Kazakh representative Kalei said unwillingly. Hearing this, Kagan's eyes couldn't help but light up, but they quickly dimmed again. "We don't have enough soldiers now. Even if we can take down Turpan city, we don't have enough cavalry to guarantee that we can trap Bugnam of Gojoseon. Until now, we haven't seen a single sign of the Black Cavalry. They are Bugnam of Gojoseon's strongest force." Although Kagan didn't want to admit it, he couldn't deny the strength of the 5-star army. In fact, from the fact that they needed the 5 Nations Army to fight together, it already proved the strength and terror of the 5-star army. Just like now, they had already sent out 2/3 of their forces, but they still couldn't shake the 5-star army. They didn't even have to reveal their trump cards, and the outcome of the battle was already clear. If they had to blame someone, they could only blame the 5 Nations Army for not sending out all of their forces. If Ili, Turpan, and Yarqiang were willing to send out 30,000 more troops, they would have taken down Turpan city a long time ago. Even if they couldn't capture Yang Qindong alive, taking down the city and injuring him wouldn't be a problem. When people work together, Mount Tai will move. However, as an army, this sentence was like a joke. No one dared to hope that they could work together. Kagan pointed out their shortcomings, and the other representatives could only lower their heads in silence. After some time, Yes Hen broke the silence and said, "Don't worry, we still have a chance. This time, we forced Bugnam of Gojoseon to hide in the city and not come out. This can be considered a huge blow to his arrogance. When the next chance comes, we will definitely succeed in one fell swoop." The results of the battle were not satisfactory, and there might even be accidents. At this moment, staying outside Turpan city was an extremely dangerous thing to do. If things went wrong, they might be surrounded by the reinforcements of the 5-star army. This was not something they wanted to see. In such a situation, retreating in time was a wise decision. Their leader's words also signified the end of the encirclement of Turpan. The next step was to retreat. After a good night's rest, they would leave this troublesome place early in the morning and regroup. Soon, the tent was empty, and all the generals were preparing to retreat early in the morning. However, they didn't know that the real darkness was about to descend. In their eyes, their biggest opponent, Bugnam of Gojoseon, had already decided to launch an all-out attack tonight. When Yang Qindong made this decision, he received a telegram from the new 5-star army and the 4th Lu Division. They were already 8 miles away from Turpan city and were ready to attack at any moment. Hearing that they were here, Yang Qindong decided to launch a night attack. Chapter 1266. Launching a night attack in the heavy snow was not a wise move. However, Yang Qindong could not wait any longer. Once dawn broke and the scouts of the 5 Nations Alliance discovered the new 5 armies or the 4th Army Division, the surprise of the battle would not be achieved and the effect of the attack would be greatly reduced. It was precisely because of the difficulty of a night attack in the heavy snow that Yang Qindong firmly believed that the 5 Nations Alliance army would not think that he would launch a night attack. This gave him a higher chance of winning. In Turpan city, there were still 15,000 Mongolian cavalry that had gathered. There was also an army of 15,000 strong men from Turpan. The biggest benefit of the joint experience of defending the city these days was that the five-star army had completely gained a foothold here and they had the support of all the citizens of Turpan city. These 15,000 cavalry were the strongest force left in the city. They would launch a surprise attack with Yang Qindong and join forces with the other two five-star army units that had rushed over from outside the city to achieve the goal of attacking from both inside and outside. In the beginning city, Yang Qindong, dressed in a golden battle robe, was riding on a white dragon warhorse and inspecting the army. The 30,000 cavalry were ready to go. Other than the occasional snorting of the warhorses, there was no other sound. They were like a pack of wolves silently waiting for their prey to appear, waiting for the alpha to give the order to charge. A silent army would give off a strong sense of killing intent. At this moment, even Yang Qindong was shocked by the performance of these soldiers. After nearly 20 days of defending the city, those who were able to survive until now were undoubtedly much more confident in their character and skills. These people had also grown into real soldiers. "Young master, it's almost time." Beta Persei, who was at the side, was wearing a white cloak and gave off a domineering feeling. He came to Yang Qindong's side and reminded him softly. "Okay, you go." Yang Qindong nodded silently. Following his action, Beta Persei quickly left and came to the front of the two pitch-black mortars in front of the army. He urged the soldiers to open the wooden boxes and take out the shells. Everyone, according to the previous battle plan, gather in front of the city gate. The bombardment will begin in 20 minutes, and after 30 minutes, the entire army will attack. Yang Qindong's voice came out of his mouth, and with the help of the wind, it spread throughout the entire square. After receiving the order, the 30,000-strong army dispersed in all directions and moved towards their respective assembly points in an orderly manner. Looking at everyone's orderly appearance, the captain of the Black Cavalry Brigade, Chiu V, couldn't help but exclaim, "These 30,000 cavalry soldiers are already qualified soldiers, they will definitely play a greater role on the battlefield in the future." Yang Qindong naturally heard this sentence, and a smug smile appeared on his face. Who would have thought that after more than 10 days of defending the city, he would have an additional cavalry of the Mongol alliance in his hands? He had already thought about it. When he returned, he would also integrate the cavalry of Turpan into the Mongol alliance. At that time, he would have another powerful force that he could use. The warhorses disappeared from the square one by one. Time passed by slowly. Finally, when the war watch's needle reached 20 minutes, Beta Persei shouted the horn to start the counterattack. Fire! Boom! 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 The two 100mm mortars immediately let out a deep roar, and then a red light flashed in the silent night. Then there was a loud rumble that shook the earth, and the shells fell into the camp of the 5 countries that had already entered a state of rest. The sudden sound of the cannons instantly plunged several large tents into a sea of fire. Shouts, curses, reprimands, and cries for help could be heard incessantly. No one would have thought that killing intent would descend from the sky in the middle of the night. When the cannons fell one after another, there were still many soldiers of the 5 countries that didn't react. They were still staring at the sea of fire in front of them, as if they had fallen into a daze. The sound of the cannons was an order. 8 miles away from the camp, the new 5th Army and the 4th Army Division's 2 cold vanguard regiments immediately moved out, maintaining a constant speed as they approached Turpan. They already knew through the telegram that tonight would be a night of slaughter. "Quick, everyone get up, I'm afraid the weather is about to change." Yes Hen didn't sleep very deeply, and this had a lot to do with his many years of marching and fighting. At this time, his slightly aged face became very serious, and he had a very bad feeling. Kagan, who had lost his nose, had already gotten up from the tent. At this moment, his face was gloomy, and his eyes flashed with the flames of anger. It was the 5-star army again. This was a huge rock that had been pressing down on him since the beginning of the battle. He really didn't know when he would be able to move it away. Kazakh General Kelly was in charge of the night watch, and his soldiers were the first to gather. At this moment, he looked at Turpan with a very resolute gaze, and said to the generals beside him, "Gather the troops, if there's nothing wrong, immediately retreat." This was the decision of a wise man, knowing that it was impossible but still doing it. This kind of thing basically wouldn't happen to them. If they couldn't win, then they would run. This was their way of survival. In the large tents belonging to the generals, each of them had different reactions, but it was undeniable that they all had one thing in common, and that was that their expressions were very serious. It was only 10 minutes of cannons, and it would be over very quickly. The number of soldiers that died in the explosion wasn't that many. What was needed was a kind of momentum, like the clouds of fire that appeared in the fire tent. This was the effect of the cannons. The drop in morale was the true power of the cannons. "Open the city gates, kill." Yang Qindong gave the order to charge and kill from within the city. In an instant, the 4 city gates opened from the inside, and countless cavalry charged out with sabers in their hands. At the same time, the new 5-star army and the 4th Lu Division's Leng Feng brothers also arrived on the battlefield. The sounds of charging and the sound of gunfire rang out incessantly, and the true attack had begun. No one had expected that on this last night, the 5-star army would suddenly launch an all-out counterattack. This was a kind of coincidence, but for the 5-star army, it was an undeniable disaster. When the sounds of killing rang out from every direction, and under the moonlight and fire, one could see a large number of black figures charging over. The 5-star army's camp was completely thrown into chaos. The so-called Alliance Army was originally unable to truly be of one heart and mind, and was as solid as a plate of iron. The sudden disaster really did live up to the old saying, when a disaster strikes, everyone flies away. The first to leave were the most well-prepared Kazakh cavalry. Under Keliai's lead, 50,000 cavalry rushed towards the southwest. When they left, they did not inform anyone. In Keliai's heart, this time, in the attack on Turpan city, which the 5-star army thought was a turtle in a jar, he had already lost 10,000 cavalry and had already fulfilled his duty. Right now, there were the figures of the 5-star army in all directions. Knowing that this battle was impossible to win, he naturally had nothing to say about leaving. The next to leave was Yeshen. The difference was that he did not head towards the southwest, which was the rear of the Ili region. Instead, he headed towards the northwest, which was the hinterland of the 5-star army. Of course, he was not looking for trouble. Instead, he was going to meet up with one of his 4 generals, Bo Muir. After roaming the grasslands for more than a decade, Yeshen deeply understood that the safest thing to do was to have military power in his hands. This was the same idea as the future where power came from the barrel of a gun. He Kagan also escaped. Under the protection of his personal guards and a few Kiliarchs, he brought 1,000 soldiers and escaped. It was not that he did not want to bring more soldiers. After more than 10 days of sieging, he only had 3,000 soldiers left. In this battle, he had lost another 2,000. Being able to bring out 1,000 people was already his greatest effort. Apart from these 3 armies, the generals and soldiers sent out by Yirkiang and Turpan were a bit slower to react. However, they were only half a beat slower and were surrounded by the 5-star army from all directions. Some of them were even waiting for reinforcements from their allies. However, how could they know that no one told them to leave? It was just to let them stay and attract the firepower of the 5-star army. Now, it seemed that they had really become scapegoats. The situation was one-sided from the start. First, the cannons attacked from afar, disrupting the defensive arrangements of the 5 allied forces. Then, the cavalry swarmed in from all directions, crushing the morale of the allied forces to the lowest point. What followed was one encirclement battle after another. Under the unfavorable conditions of insufficient troops, low morale, the encirclement battle quickly ended before noon the next day. In this battle, 13,000 soldiers of the 5-star army were wiped out, and 30,000 prisoners were taken. In the end, the so-called surprise decapitation operation of the 5 allied forces ended in failure, with the loss of soldiers and a great loss of strength. When the news spread back to the various factions, they were shocked and immediately sent out envoys to Turpan city. They brought large amounts of gold, silver, and other valuables. It was obvious that they wanted to lower their heads and beg for peace. Yang Qindong did not have any intention of rejecting this. Although he never accepted peace and only accepted surrender, the weather was cold and snow was everywhere. This was very disadvantageous for the army. Taking this opportunity to reorganize the army, it was not impossible to fight again in the spring. Taking this opportunity to take some money and lower the other side's vigilance. Wasn't this a strategic strategy? Turpan city returned to its peaceful state, and the citizens of the city were beaming with joy. Not only did they survive this battle, many of them had also gained benefits. In their hearts, the name of Bugnam of Gojoseon, or the Heavenly Khan, had unknowingly increased. When Yang Qindong returned from the battlefield outside the city, he was welcomed by the hundreds of thousands of people in the city. Regarding this, Yang Qindong naturally waved his hand in a high-spirited manner. He would never put on airs in front of the citizens, because these were his future citizens. Even second- and third-class citizens were still citizens. Chapter 1267. Young Master, this is the will of the people. Seeing so many people spontaneously showing happy smiles on their faces, Beta Persei did not forget to flatter him. This is because we brought them more than King Hardenbarter brought them. Of course, the people will make a choice. It's just that they were born here. They can welcome me today, but in the future, they may choose to welcome others when they are given more benefits. So the migration work cannot be stopped. When the people of the provinces arrive, they will all be replaced. Yang Qindong will not easily believe others, let alone change his previous decision because of a smiling face. Since the facts have proven that the migration work is the best way to solve the internal problems, of course he will not hesitate to carry it out and will not change it at will. Yes, young master. Beta Persei quickly agreed. One of his main tasks working next to Yang Qindong was to act as an assistant. He would remember everything that was said and ordered and would instruct the specialized people to carry it out later. After agreeing, Beta Persei summarized the information he had just received. Young Master, just now the commander of the new 5th Army, Shi Wanshan, made a request. There are 100,000 Walla cavalry in the northwest and 20,000 Walla cavalry in the northeast. He wants to try to chase them all the way. Young Master, please give the order. A total of 40,000 cavalrymen were sent to stop the 4th Army Division. Among them, 20,000 were Walla and 20,000 were Kazakh. When the general counterattack was launched last night, Yeshen did not escape to the southwest like the other coalition forces, but chose to go to the northwest to join Bomur's 100,000 iron cavalry. Now the problem is that Yang Qindong only has a seemingly mobile new 5th Army in his hands. Their ability can only destroy one part of the enemy, so the choice must be decided by Yang Qindong. Is there a need to choose? Yang Qindong stopped and looked back at Beta Persei. Beta Persei, who didn't know what Yang Qindong meant, was a little confused, but since the young master asked, he still said tentatively, we should choose to pursue Yeshen. This is our old opponent. It's best to take this opportunity to get rid of him. Sigh. A soft sigh came from Yang Qindong's mouth. Thinking that his answer did not satisfy the young master, Beta Persei scratched the back of his head and said, then let's pursue the 40,000 cavalrymen. They are few in number and easy to deal with. Well, it looks like you can't think of a good idea. Let's do it this way. The new 5th Army will be responsible for pursuing the 40,000 cavalrymen of the coalition forces. Matson will lead 30,000 cavalrymen to pursue the escaping Yeshen. This time, we can't let any of them go. Yang Qindong said with an extremely firm voice. In his eyes, there was no such thing as choosing one of the two. He wanted to choose both. When he heard that even the 30,000 cavalrymen under Matson would be sent out, Beta Persei became nervous. Young master, this way, we won't have any troops around us. Once what? Do you think the coalition forces would dare to come to Turpan at this time? Besides, it's not like we don't have any troops. Don't we still have 2,000 black cavalry and 2 regiments of cold front warriors? They are the most elite. Are you afraid that they won't be able to protect the young master? Yang Qindong knew what Beta Persei wanted to say, so he just said it directly. Yang Qindong was so decisive that Beta Persei knew that there was no room for negotiation. He immediately said, "Yes, I will give them the order according to the young master's instructions." At this time, the 5 nations coalition forces had just been defeated. They really didn't have the courage to cause trouble for Turpan at this time. In addition, whether it was the Black Cavalry or the Cold Front warriors, they could each fight against 10 enemies. So the security around him wasn't bad. Beta Persei thought about it and found that there was no problem, so he went to pass the order. Soon, the 2 armies received the order and went to their respective targets. Northeast of Turpan. From afar, it was still covered in snow and a vast expanse of white. The cold wind blew, blowing on people's faces as if they were being cut by a knife. A large formation of cavalry was currently moving with great difficulty on this road. They were Gu Lijiang's troops who had lost their target. At this moment, Gu Lijiang's face was extremely ugly. He didn't expect that the wind and snow this time would be so heavy that he even lost his target. Now, all he could see was a vast expanse of white. Where do you want him to go to find the missing 5-star army? Should he just go back like this? Gu Lijiang didn't dare. He clearly understood Kelly's temperament. He was the younger brother of Aksanjanabat Khan. In the entire country and the military, he wouldn't give face to anyone except his elder brother. Many times, in order to establish his authority, he would find trouble and kill people. Not to mention that he had just committed a grave mistake. He couldn't just admit defeat like this. He had to continue looking, maybe there was still a chance. Gu Lijiang said, then ordered to continue expanding the search area. At this moment, for his own life, his own mission, he completely ignored the soldiers in the army who had been working for 2 days without rest. The snow finally stopped, but it still continued. Under the sky, visibility was very low. It was precisely because of this that Ning Wenfeng's infantry division approached the area without being discovered. It wasn't until the other side was less than 3 miles away that both sides discovered each other at the same time. There's the 5-star army here. There's an enemy here. Almost at the same time, 2 loud shouts rang out, attracting everyone's attention and causing both sides to become excited and excited. Ning Wenfeng was the commander of the infantry division. Although the number of soldiers under his command was the largest in the entire new 5-star army, he didn't have the help of warhorses, so he couldn't move fast enough. This was his biggest disadvantage. Fortunately, the wind and snow had been blowing recently, so the warhorses couldn't increase their speed. This gave the infantry an opportunity. This time, Ning Wenfeng wanted to be the first to find the enemy and obtain the first merit. For this reason, Ning Wenfeng issued a strict order to all the regimental commanders. That was, unless one of their brothers found the enemy, they absolutely couldn't retreat at will, let alone return empty-handed. Under his urging, the infantry advanced decisively and quickly, faintly leaving the other 3 cavalry divisions behind. This was the result of the snow. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. It seemed that the heavens hadn't finished favoring Ning Wenfeng. Not only did it allow them to be the fastest, it also allowed them to be the first to find the target. It was as if this shout attracted the attention of all 15,000 officers of the infantry division. At the same time, Gu Lijiang was also excited. He originally thought that the target had disappeared, but he didn't expect to see it in the end. We finally found it, ha ha ha. Gu Lijiang looked up to the sky and laughed, thanking the heavens. But if he knew that what he found wasn't the 2 regiments of the 4th Infantry Division, but a 15,000-strong infantry division of the 5-star army, he wouldn't be able to smile now. Instead, he would be thinking of how to escape from this place. There weren't so many ifs in the world. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many things happening. Then, when both sides charged forward with excitement, a great battle between cavalry and infantry began. Under the snow that was half a meter high, the advantage of cavalry couldn't be fully displayed. In the end, the Kazakh cavalry gave up on their warhorses and changed to fighting on foot. Adding on the fact that they hadn't rested for 2 days, their physical strength had dropped to the extreme. Just from this point of view, Gu Lijiang had already lost the initiative. Along the way, Bu Sishi's physical strength had also decreased, but compared to the Kazakh army, it was a lot better. In addition, Ning Wenfeng had promised before the battle that if they found the enemy and won the battle, he would reward them handsomely. This caused their morale to be very high. This also gave them a lot of points in the following battle. Comparing the two, from the start of the battle, the Kazakh army was at a disadvantage. After fighting in the snow for more than 8 hours, Gu Lijiang's troops were starting to show signs of not being able to defeat the enemy. It was also at this time that the soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 5-star army arrived. Under the leadership of Division Commander Ancient River, they appeared on the battlefield like fierce tigers. This was the last straw that broke the camel's back. The Kazakh cavalry's morale finally began to show signs of collapse. In ancient times, when two sides fought, it was a battle of morale. Regardless of which side had this point, it was very likely that they would win. Even if they had fewer troops, there were many examples of people who won with fewer troops. No matter which side, once the morale of the troops collapsed, no matter how many soldiers there were, they would only be a motley crew. In the end, they would only be defeated. The appearance of the 1st Cavalry Division had broken the morale of Gu Lijiang's troops. The soldiers under her had either fled or surrendered. There weren't many people who were still fighting the enemy. In the next 2 hours, the Kazakh army had been destroyed. Gu Lijiang had died in battle, and the enemy had captured about 12,000 soldiers. Come, leave 2 regiments behind to look after these prisoners. We will continue to look for the 20,000 Walla cavalry. Ning Wenfeng didn't stop just because he had obtained a victory. In his view, this was just the beginning. When Ancient River saw Ning Wenfeng's order, his eyes widened. Then, he laughed heartily. Good, Division Commander Ning. I didn't expect you to have such a valiant side. You weren't like this in the past. Ancient River was right. Although Ning Wenfeng was in charge of a portion of the military in the past, he rarely did things so decisively. Even when there was a war, he rarely went to the battlefield. He was the kind of person who could be considered a military advisor. But now, he was displaying the style of a valiant general. Ancient River couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. Ha! Ning Wenfeng replied with a smile. Of course, the current situation was different from the past. When he was in the Baiming army, he was just idling around. He took the responsibility of preserving his strength. As long as he didn't make any big mistakes and was willing to send money to the higher-ups, he could keep his position. But in the 5-star army, all the military officers were judged based on their achievements. Here, there was no need to talk about seniority or background. Everything depended on who was stronger. Chapter 1268. In the face of the situation where the capable were the top and the mediocre were the bottom, as long as one was a smart person, they should know what to do. Ning Wenfeng was originally a smart person among smart people. Naturally, he understood this point long ago and naturally knew what to do. This time, Ning Wenfeng was so desperate because he wanted to rely on military achievements to prove himself. At the same time, he wanted to prove that Yang Qindong's vision was not wrong. Their new 5 armies was an army that could fight. Just like when they were rushing to Tulyafan, even though the soldiers were very tired, none of them complained. They just wanted to prove themselves and complete the mission better. Ning Wenfeng's ambition was not small, but his luck seemed to have run out. After searching for several days, he even found the cold front company that Commander De Chang had left behind to watch the bicycle's safety. However, he did not see the figure of the Walla cavalry. In fact, he did not know that General Chao Lu had already left here with 20,000 cavalry and rushed to the place where Bomur was. Along with him was the leader of the Walla cavalry, Yes Hen, who was rushing from another direction. After the failure of the 5 armies to besiege Turpan city, Yeshen lost confidence in this so-called allied army. This was not a united army at all. There were too many subordinates, and everyone wanted to take advantage of the situation. How could they win a battle when there were so many different voices in an army? How could they win a battle? How could they win a battle? Yeshen, who could not see any hope, finally gave up all his fantasies. He decided to work alone like before. With so many elite cavalry in his hands, even if they were not a match for the 5-star army, how could he be afraid of others? At worst, he would just stay away from the 5-star army in the future. How could the world be surnamed Yang? With this goal in mind, Yeshen sent someone to find Qiao Lu a few days ago when Beta Persei suddenly bombarded his artillery positions. He told him not to search for the 5-star army anymore and to go straight to where Bomur was. They had to leave this place and stay away from all the forces and territories of the 5-star army. Reality proved that Yezi's thoughts were correct. When he saw the 5-star army's counterattack begin, he did not put up any resistance, nor did he have any desire to fight back. Instead, he quickly led his 15,000 cavalry out of Turpan, heading straight for where Bomur was. Originally, he had 20,000 cavalrymen with him. However, when the siege was not going well, he listened to Hikagen's words and took out 5,000 cavalrymen. He told them to give up their expertise in horsemanship and become infantrymen to siege the city. In the end, other than the 600 injured, the rest died in the siege. This made him hate Hikagen and the others even more. You deserve to lose. What kind of idiot general would give such an order to let the infantry attack the city? Yeshen thought angrily. He did not think about it at all. When Qing made this suggestion, he had raised both hands in agreement. Whether it was Yeshen or Qiao Lu, they were now leading their cavalry to Bomur's location as fast as possible. But they did not know that Bomur's situation was not good at this moment. At least, he was far from being in control of the situation as they thought. In terms of military strength, Bomur, who had nearly 100,000 cavalry, was undoubtedly the most powerful. But they were facing the nearly 50,000 5-star army, and all of them were elites. No one would underestimate such an opponent, nor would they dare to. The two sides faced each other like this, separated by 8 li in the wind and snow. No one moved rashly. It looked like they were evenly matched, but only Bomur knew that as the days passed, his situation would only get worse. There was only one reason, and that was that he was facing the 5-star army. This was a powerful enemy that could send reinforcements at any time. On the other hand, he already had the most cavalry. Even if leader Yeshen and General Qiao Lu came here, there was a limit to how much they could increase their strength. Compared to the 5-star army who would send countless reinforcements, and compared to Yang Qindong who was so rich that no one could see his trump cards, the longer the stalemate, the more unfavorable it would be for them. Even though he clearly knew this, Bomur could not retreat. First, he had already received news from leader Yeshen, telling him to wait here. He could not guarantee where he would meet up with the leader if he left now. Second, in the current situation, the two sides could still maintain the balance if they did not move. But if one side left, would the other side chase after them? If it was a direct confrontation, with 100,000 cavalry, Bomur didn't fear the 5-star army that had less than 50,000 cavalry. However, if he took the initiative to leave, and the enemy began to pursue him, even he didn't dare to guarantee what would happen during the pursuit. In other words, Bomur was currently being watched and could not move. He could not guarantee that he would be able to escape unscathed. Now, all he could do was wait for leader Yeshen to appear, and let him decide on the big plan. Compared to Bomur's side, the 5-star army's side was also not in a good situation. Everything was because the first army did not appear on time, causing the pincer attack to be delayed again and again. In the camp, Commander Bai Shuang, who was dressed in a mighty military uniform and had the rank of senior colonel, said, "I have already reported the matter of the first army not appearing on time to teacher." His voice was firm, his expression calm. Bai Shuang's words caused the expressions of the other commanders in the tent to change. Everyone knew that the First Army didn't arrive on time. For this matter, the new 5-star Army Commander Su Ke had personally called Commander Su He of the new 5-star Army, saying that because the snow was too thick and the roads were difficult to travel on, their advance speed was greatly hindered, and they were unable to reach the designated location on time. He admitted his mistake and asked for 5 more days. He would definitely arrive on time and ask for forgiveness at that time. After receiving the contents of this telegram, Commander Su He immediately took it out and showed it to all the commanders around him. Although he did not say anything, sometimes not saying anything represented his attitude. It meant that Su He wanted to give face to Su Ke. The army would wait for 5 more days before launching the attack. For a dignified army commander to admit his mistake, and with such a humble attitude, the other military commanders had no choice but to suppress their anger. After all, they were all in the same pot, and it was impossible for them not to make mistakes. Giving others a chance was the same as giving themselves a chance. However, they had never imagined that Bai Shuang would suddenly say this when Su He called them together to discuss the military operation plan of how to launch the attack when the first alien army arrived 4 days later. Everyone was in an uproar at once. Compared to everyone else, Bai Shuang's identity was naturally very special. He was Yang Qindong's student. When others were just qualified to address Yang Qindong as the 6th young master, he was already close enough to address him as teacher. In ancient times, heaven, earth, ruler, teacher, and teacher were existences that were highly respected. Among them was his teacher. Teachers were also extremely particular about inheritance, and it also represented a closer relationship. Based on this, although he was only a commander, no one dared to look down on Bai Shuang's words. Even the only general present, Su He, was the same. This was because he was certain that as long as Bai Shuang did not make any major mistakes, with this person's age, his future achievements would definitely surpass his own. Therefore, when Bai Shuang said that he had already reported this matter to Yang Qindong through his own radio, Su He did not have the slightest intention of reprimanding him. He only silently mourned for Su Ke in his heart. Commander Su, this time, it's not that I don't want to help you, but this matter has already been reported to the 6th young master. You are in trouble. A military meeting to discuss important matters was also stopped because of Bai Shuang's words. After all, even Bugnam of Gojoseon knew about this matter. This meant that the plan could change at any time. It was a little too early for them to discuss what would happen in a few days. Yes, Su Ke was in trouble, and the situation had indeed changed as everyone expected. When Yang Qindong received Bai Shuang's telegram in Toyifan City, his eyes flashed with anger. If it was only because of the weather that they were unable to arrive at the designated location on time, Yang Qindong would not be so angry. But now, the first army of the foreign races didn't inform him about this matter. Instead, they wanted to hide it from him and inform the other armies. This was something Yang Qindong couldn't tolerate. This was deceit. It was a blatant lie. If they succeed this time, there may be similar things happening in the future. If this is not stopped, will there be a day when the military commanders below join forces to deceive him, or even deal with him? Since ancient times, internal strife and even internal strife were allowed in the army, but they would never allow the loss of military power to happen. Because this is a provocation to a leader, it is a deadly threat. Inform the whole army. With anger flashing in his eyes, Yang Qindong exuded an indescribable murderous aura from top to bottom. Yang Er, who was beside Yang Qindong, felt his entire body tremble. The rage that was being emitted from Yang Qindong's body made him feel as if he was about to lose his balance. He only felt better if his entire body kept trembling. This is the aura of a superior. Army notification: new Army Commander Su He will be given a demerit. New Army Light Cavalry Regiment Commander Ma Xiangshan, Far Eastern Army 1st Cavalry Division Commander Dai Kuo will be given a serious warning. For divisional officers of the new army will be given a warning. 1st Army Commander Su Ke. Yang Qindong suddenly stopped here, which made Beta Persei, who was in charge of recording, break out in a cold sweat. He knew how big of a shock this military notification would cause. I'm afraid that many people's future prospects will be greatly affected. But who knows how the main character, Suda, would deal with this. Chapter 1269. After hesitating for a moment, Yang Qindong's expression became firm again. Su Kuda will be demoted to regiment commander, replacing Bai Shuang's position as regiment commander. Bai Shuang will assume the position of regiment commander. Everything will be carried out after this battle. After all, Bai Shuang was too young and didn't have any experience as a division commander. Being in charge of a regiment was very different from being in charge of an army. However, considering that Bai Shuang was the regiment commander of the 1st Cavalry Division and was already a senior colonel, it wasn't too sudden for him to take on the role of a general. As long as he made some contributions, he would be promoted. Beta Persei saw that Yang Qindong didn't have any other orders, so he went to report to Wang Shan. He could imagine what kind of influence and shock this telegram would have once it was sent to the entire army. Just as Beta Persei thought, this telegram was sent to the entire army. Any army, division, or regiment that was high enough to be equipped with a radio would soon know about it. A lot of people didn't know what happened that made Yang Qindong so angry. But as the person who knew about it, the commander of the First Army, Su Kuda, was completely dumbfounded. Looking at this telegram that was extremely heavy for him, he froze in place and didn't say a word for a full 15 minutes. Commander. The commander of the 301 Division, Tu Hai, didn't know what happened. He only saw that Su Kuda didn't move at all, so he carefully came up and asked, "Did Bugnam of Gojoseon have any new orders?" "Oh, you take a look. Also, don't call me commander anymore. After the army meets up with the new army, I will report to the new unit." Su Kuda smiled bitterly. After he said this, he sent the telegram to his trusted subordinate, Tu Hai. At this moment, Tu Hai was also very shocked. What did he mean by not calling him commander anymore? Did he get promoted again? That shouldn't be the case. Right now, Tu Hai was still a senior colonel. It was already very difficult for him to be a commander with this position. How could there be a better position than this? With all kinds of doubts, Tu Hai opened the telegram. When he saw the contents clearly, his expression changed drastically. After a long while, he pointed at the telegram. This. He was speechless. Su Ke didn't care about Tu Hai's reaction. At this time, he had already awakened from his shock. This time, he had indeed done something very wrong. He actually wanted to hide the truth from the 6th young master. This kind of action of treating military orders as child's play could be interpreted as deception. This should not be tolerated by any superior. It was already a blessing that he wasn't thrown into jail. Now, he was even given the position of regiment commander. This was giving him a chance to take the blame and perform meritorious deeds. If he gave up on himself at this time, then even the gods would not be able to save him. Right now, the most important thing to do was to make up for his mistakes and stand up again. He didn't want to disappoint the 6th young master. Commander 2, didn't Commander Mingji say that he has a way to speed up the army's advance? Now, invite him over. Before, he wanted to protect his dignity as a commander, so he suppressed the 3rd Division Commander Sensei Naganabu. Now that Su Ke had been taught a lesson, there was no need for him to protect his dignity. Su Ke suddenly woke up. After that, someone reported his performance to Yang Qindong. It was also because of this action that his life was saved. Because if he really chose to give up on himself, even the position of commander of the world's #1 army might not be his. After experiencing this incident, Su Kuda had finally grown up and would have greater achievements in the future. Of course, this was all in the future. In the tent, Bai Shuang looked at the telegram and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The reason why he reported this matter to Yang Qindong was because he didn't want to do anything that would let his teacher down. He didn't expect that the position of commander would fall on his head. Although a soldier who didn't want to be a general wasn't a good soldier, this kind of position was not what he wanted. With his own efforts, Bai Shuang believed that one day he would be able to become a general, and that day wasn't too far away. Now, although time was saved, it was inevitable that he would be criticized. Since it was Yang Qindong's order and it was reported to the entire army, it couldn't be changed. Since there's a heavy burden on my shoulders, I'll work hard. Bai Shuang, who knew that he couldn't change the situation, could only accept it. But now, no matter how you looked at it, his expression was like he was pretending to be obedient. Bai Shuang was pleasantly surprised. In contrast, the new army's commander Su He had a worried expression. Especially when he looked at the 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Ke Lu, he felt even more guilty. Ke Lu's outstanding performance, especially when he used the strength of a single division to block the attack of 30,000 elite cavalrymen of Walla, heavily injuring the enemy in a situation where he suffered very few casualties. It was these achievements that made it a sure thing that he would be promoted to a commander. Su He had already reported this to Yang Qindong and basically received his approval. He received news that the new army had already decided on the position of commander, and it was very likely that he would be the commander of the 102nd Division, second only to the 101st Division's commander, Lu Zhua. It seemed that after this battle, he would be promoted by 2 ranks, from a division to an army. But now, a warning had completely ruined this good opportunity. According to the rules of the 5-star army, once an officer received a warning, there was no possibility of promotion within half a year. Half a year, by that time, the new army would have been formed, which meant that Ke Lu lost this opportunity to improve. Facing the silent Ke Lu, Su He opened and closed his mouth, then closed and opened again. In the end, he said bitterly, "Ke Lu, I'm sorry." This time, Ke Lu's mood was a bit heavy. Seeing such a fat piece of meat fly away just like that, no one would feel good about it. But it was already the truth, there was no point in blaming anyone, he could only say that he was unlucky. Thinking about how he would have to work under Su He in the future, Ke Lu could only force a smile and said, "General, I'd still like to fight under your command." No one would take these words seriously, they were obviously comforting words. Su He waved his hand and said seriously, "This time, I owe you. Don't worry, if there's an opportunity next time, I'll do my best to fight for you." "Then thank you, General, for your help." Ke Lu pretended to have his eyes lit up and said. But both of them knew that the position of a general wasn't easy to come by, and how could it be easy to fight for? This time, because there were 3 general positions at once, and because Ke Lu made a great contribution, he had the qualifications to have such a good opportunity. Next time, even if there really was a general position, there was no guarantee that it would be in the bag. Su Ke received the harshest criticism and demotion. But he didn't let it go. Instead, he quickly adjusted his position. Based on the principle of being in position for a minute, doing a good job for 60 seconds, he found the 303 RD Division's commander, Sensei Naganabu. After some discussion, he quickly approved of the idea of clearing snow at the front and speeding up the march. The order was quickly passed down to the entire army. Sure enough, they arrived at the designated location 3 days later. They came to the northwest of Bo Mu, Er's army of 100,000, and formed a pincer attack with Su He's new army. Bo Mu, was a cautious person, otherwise, he wouldn't have been chosen by Yeshen to stay behind at the headquarters. In order to prevent being surrounded by the 5-star army, he sent out all of his scouts, and the furthest he sent them was 50 miles away. When the first army of the foreign races arrived, he received the news, and his expression became even more unsightly. Before, he could still use the advantage of numbers to suppress the enemy's 5-star army, but with the appearance of the 30,000 5-star army, his advantage in numbers was very small. He didn't need to fight on both sides. No matter how he looked at it, he was now in a passive position. Fortunately, he received another message that night. Tomorrow evening, the 15,000 cavalrymen led by the previous leader and the 20,000 cavalrymen led by General Chao Lu would meet up with him here. With this, they had an additional 30,000 troops, which allowed them to regain their advantage in terms of military strength. Regrettably, this good mood didn't last long. Very quickly, the scouts came back with news that the leader had personally sent over. Behind them, there were still 35,000 cavalrymen rushing over. Both sides were only a day's distance away from each other. There are still 30,000 five-star army cavalry. Where did the other 4 countries go? Bo Mu was naturally shocked when he heard the news. Logically speaking, the 5-star army shouldn't have so many troops in their hands, unless they were all used to deal with him. It must be like this. The 4 countries were beaten up, and with the heavy snow affecting the speed of the army, they should be holed up at home right now. In this case, didn't it mean that the 5-star army's main goal was to deal with him? When the 5 countries were together, they couldn't gain the slightest advantage, and they even lost one battle after another. Now that he had to face the 5-star army alone, Bo Mu didn't have the slightest chance of victory. Being afraid before the battle, this wasn't something a qualified general should do. Forcefully calming his mind, Bo Mu's gaze fell on the last message sent by Yes Hen. When his gaze fell on the words, "only a day away," his eyes flashed with thought. "I can only stake it all. Come, call the scouts over." After thinking for a while, Bo Mu decided to take the risk and attack. He had to kill his way out before the 30,000 cavalry of the 5-star army arrived. Otherwise, if he was really surrounded, he wouldn't have the slightest chance of victory. Chapter 1270. After the scout reported that Bo Mu had given the news to Yes Hen, Bo Mu held a military meeting that very night, and selected a group of 5,000 death cavalry. The so-called death cavalry referred to those who did not fear death. Because of various reasons, they made some mistakes and should be killed. Because of this, they came to the battlefield with the determination to die. And those who were not even afraid of death were the most terrifying. Not only that, Bo Mu also gave the defeated Qing 50,000 troops, ordering him to stop the 5-star army from the west from sending reinforcements to the 5-star army from the northeast no matter what. If you can stop them, it will be a great merit. If you can't, you can use your death as an apology. Chang Tian is watching you, I wish you good luck. Under Bo Mu's serious expression, all kinds of orders were given, and the 90,000 cavalry quickly moved. At noon on the second day, they suddenly launched an attack on the first army of the non-humankind from the northeast. This sudden attack without any warning had indeed caught the first army off guard. Fortunately, Yang Qindong's report had just been sent out, and all the officers were very careful. Even if no one expected the Walla cavalry to attack, after a moment of panic, they still managed to stop the other party's attack. They did not immediately send out the 5,000 death cavalry, but only sent out 5,000 ordinary cavalry, in order to test the strength of the 5-star army. Seeing the 5,000 cavalry quickly being pushed back, unable to move an inch, Bo Mu could not help but sigh. The 5-star army is really strict and not easy to deal with. After sending out his sigh, Bo Mu had no intention of retreating. His goal was very simple, and that was to continuously attack, causing the first army to feel fatigued. Then, when leader Yes Hen and General Chao Lu arrived, he would gather a large number of troops and open a bloody path. At that time, his troops would be nearly 3 times the enemy's, and charging out should not be a problem. Now, it was time to see if Qing could defend against the attack of the 5-star army from the west. Thinking about it, it shouldn't be a problem since it was 50,000 against 50,000 and they were on the defensive side. Although the snow had stopped, the thick layer of snow still became the biggest stumbling block for the cavalry. As the attacking party, they were at a great disadvantage. It was just like how Bo Mu's attack on the first army was not very smooth. When the new army wanted to support them, they also faced great difficulties. At the beginning of the war, Commander Su He, Commander Bai Shuang, Commander Ma Xiangshan, Commander Dai Qua and the others were all confused about the reason why they started a fight without any warning. They couldn't understand why the Walla cavalry would suddenly go crazy and choose to attack at this time. Fortunately, everyone was prepared to fight a big and fierce battle when they came here. Although they weren't fully mentally prepared, the soldiers were all experienced soldiers. They quickly adapted and began to charge towards the Walla cavalry camp in an orderly manner. They wanted to attack from 2 sides with the first army. Even if they couldn't do it, they could at least share some of the firepower and pressure of their brother's army. However, under the heavy snow, the attack wasn't very effective, especially when facing General Qing, who was doing his best to stop them. This person had the idea of dying if he didn't succeed. He also had 50,000 cavalry in his hands. In terms of troops and chariots, he was even more powerful than Su He and the others. In a situation where they didn't have any advantage, after Commander Chang Bo of the new army's 4th Cavalry Division attacked, 2 regiments of cavalry were crippled. Are they crazy? It was rare to encounter such a tough battle. Commander Chang Bo was shocked and quickly reported the situation to the commander. At the same time, he couldn't help but reduce the frequency of the attack. If they continued to lose like this, not only would they not be able to break through, it was very likely that his entire 4th Cavalry Division would be lost here. This was something that no military commander wanted to see and wouldn't do. In the new army's tent, after Commander Chang Bo's report was sent here, everyone including Su He frowned. It was clear that they didn't understand the actions of the Walla cavalry. It looked like they were trying to break through, but it wasn't that easy to do. Although the first army of the foreign races was a newly formed army, there were many veterans among them. Furthermore, the roads were passable, and the snow was too thick, so it would not be easy for them to charge out. It was very likely that they would suffer heavy casualties and fail to achieve their goal. They could see this logic, and so could the Wallace general. But why did they still do this? The tent was abnormally quiet for a while. After a full 15 minutes, everyone still couldn't find the slightest clue. No one said a word. In the end, it was Bai Shuang who spoke. Okay, I see that everyone can't think of a reason like me. Let's report it to the teacher. Report it? Su He raised his eyebrows after hearing this. It wasn't that he didn't think of doing this, but wouldn't that prove his incompetence? He had just been executed. But when he thought of this kind of battle, if a mistake in judgment led to even greater losses, the result was not something he could bear. Besides, who was Bai Shuang? Even if he didn't agree, he had a separate radio in his hands that could contact Yang Qindong. If that happened, he would only be more passive. Okay, then let's report it. Let's ask the 6th young master to give us a clear path. After thinking about it, Su He decided to accept Bai Shuang's suggestion. The telegram was quickly drafted. After the commanders read it and found no problems, they reported it through the radio. After a stick of incense's time, a reply came. Compared to Su He and Bai Shuang, who only focused on one army and one area, Yang Qindong looked at the entire situation. Although he didn't know about the 20,000 cavalry led by Chao Lu, he knew that Yes Hen led 15,000 elite cavalry to meet up with General Bo Muir. With Yang Qindong's intelligence, he naturally realized that Bo Muir was preparing to break out of the encirclement. At the same time, it was to prevent the 30,000 cavalry led by Na Ri Song from pressuring them enough to find a way out. After all, once Na Ri Song's 30,000 cavalry arrived, they wouldn't have any advantage in terms of numbers. This was an opportunity to make the Walla army stay, but it wasn't a good opportunity. Even a cornered beast would fight, let alone 100,000 Walla elite cavalry. Once they went crazy, coupled with the snow, the various troops might not be able to reach the designated location on time to provide reinforcements. In this way, there would be too many uncertainties in the war. After thinking about it, Yang Qindong didn't give the order to fight to the death. Instead, he pointed out the Walla army's movements and allowed the various troops to deal with it as they saw fit without losing too much of their combat strength. Dealing with it as they saw fit was equivalent to handing over the command to the various commanders. This was also Yang Qindong's way of commanding. As the military strength of his subordinates continued to expand, Yang Qindong could no longer do everything by himself like before. Therefore, it was necessary to delegate power appropriately, especially to those commanders who rushed to the front lines. They were better able to direct the movements of the battle. Sometimes, opportunities were fleeting, and if they weren't grasped in time, there might be problems. Yang Qindong had been practicing for many years and understood how to use people. It was precisely because of Yu Qian that he didn't have to worry about Qiqian City and didn't need to be distracted. Similarly, it was because of the existence of Tiger's Mane that he was like a nail nailed into Xiwan City. As a result, his influence and power were growing. To put it simply, the way to use people was to learn to use people and learn to trust people, and not to give orders in every aspect. It was like Zhuge Liang who did everything by himself. In the end, he was exhausted to death, and without his subordinates, he immediately lost his drive and ability to command. Old Jiang was the same, constantly giving orders from the back, causing the battle plan to change again and again. Loopholes appeared frequently, and the army was defeated in the end. With these precedents as an example, how could Yang Qindong follow in his footsteps? When the telegram was sent to them, the eyes of the commanders in the tent lit up after they read it. This discretion was very significant. Handing over the command to them was a form of trust, but how could it not be a heavy responsibility? Everyone, you have seen the telegram. The Walla cavalry will suddenly launch an attack, saying that they are preparing to kill their way out. Now, their leader, Yes Hen, is also moving here. Then, should we completely keep them here, or should we let them live to prevent both sides from suffering losses? Let's discuss this matter. Su He, as the general with the highest military rank and the highest rank, was naturally the best choice to preside over the meeting. As soon as his voice fell, the commanders looked at each other, not knowing what to do. From a psychological point of view, after fighting with the Walla army for so long, of course they wanted to completely keep them here to prevent future troubles. But now was really not a good time. The snow was too thick, and it greatly affected the movement speed of the army. Moreover, the other party's military strength was not ordinary, and their combat strength was quite strong. If they were to fight head-on, not to mention that they might not be able to keep their lives, their losses would definitely not be small. Yang Qindong had already sent out a notice to the entire army. After this battle, they had to take a break. While the army rested and replenished, the migration of the civilians also had to be carried out. They would only attack the Ili region after the snow melted in spring. And if everyone suffered heavy losses now, it would delay the important matters after spring. What should they do? Among the commanders, there were very quickly two opinions. Some people said that they should use this opportunity to completely eliminate Yes Hen. This was a great enemy that the 5-star army rarely faced. If they were eliminated, the 5-star army would no longer have any opponents in this grassland. From a long-term perspective, this was appropriate. Chapter 1271. There were also some people who said that there was no winner in a head-on clash. If they really fought with the Walla army this time and both sides suffered losses, or even greatly damaged their vitality, then when spring came, how would they attack the inner region? How would they accomplish their goals? It was not worth it to give up a large piece of land for Yes Hen, who was like a stray dog. Both opinions had their own supporters, and both had their own reasons. When Su He gathered all the opinions, he was in a dilemma. In the end, his gaze fell on Bai Shuang. After this battle, this person would take up the position of commander. He was in existence on the same level as him, so it was not shameful to listen to his opinion. Of course, Su He knew whether or not he was using Bai Shuang's name in private. This person was Yang Qindong's student. Even if his decision was wrong, Yang Qindong would not blame him too heavily. Su He did not have to be careful. As Yang Xie's territory grew larger and larger, the 5-star army became more and more powerful, and Yang Qindong's position became more and more noble. Anyone who faced him had to be careful. This was the aura of a superior. Bai Shuang did not think too much about it. Perhaps it was because of his status that he did not need to worry about these things. He had other thoughts in his mind. Even if Su He did not ask him, he would have said it himself. He took this opportunity to say, this general has a few opinions. Right now, the war has just begun, and no one can predict what will happen next. Why don't we prepare for both sides? Prepare for both sides? Hearing Bai Shuang's words, everyone looked at him with confusion. Yes, prepare for both sides. Bai Shuang said with certainty, first, we naturally plan to destroy the Walla's main force, or even capture or kill Yes Hen. We still have to do the necessary charge and support. The foreign race's first army will still be blocked. If we can heavily injure them and find an opportunity, we will move out with our entire army and crush them. Secondly, if there's no turning back, and the Walla armies will to fight to the death is obvious, and they've always held the initiative on the battlefield, then we should give up on fighting them head-on, and weaken the enemy's strength as much as possible without losing our own strength. If it's really impossible, then we should just let them leave. The future is long. If we can beat them away today, then we can defeat them in the future and wipe them all out. Two different opinions were put forward at once. Their considerations were taken into consideration by the officers. After everyone heard it, they all nodded in agreement. There were even some people who thought in their hearts, as expected of Wu Nanking's student, he has a very thorough understanding of the 4 words discretion. Su He, who was sitting at the head of the table, also nodded in agreement. Previously, he thought that Bai Shuang was directly promoted to commander because he was Yang Qindong's student. Now, it seemed that this opinion needed to be changed. This person was indeed very capable, and he might be able to take up the position of commander. Bai Shuang's opinion received everyone's agreement. Then, this opinion was reported to Yang Qindong. Soon, a telegram was sent back to deal with this matter. Not long after, the foreign race's first army also received the telegram. Su Ku, who was going to be demoted after the war, after seeing the telegram, he only thought for a moment before saying to his 4 division commanders, "Everything will be done according to the telegram. We will use all our strength to stop them. If we can't catch them, then let them pass by us." "No, Commander." The 301st Division commander, Tu Hai, immediately objected. "Commander, this is an opportunity for the foreign race's first army. If we can stop the Walla army and even capture their leader, Yes Hen, it will definitely be a great achievement. Maybe you won't have to leave. In order to achieve this goal, even if we have to sacrifice our entire army, it will be worth it." "That's right, military commander." The other 3 division commanders also expressed the same opinion. Su Ke's army was obviously very capable. At least, he quickly won the support of his 4 division commanders. Looking at the expectant gazes of the 4, Su Ke's heart was very moved. However, he wasn't moved. He knew that it was his negligence and arrogance that caused the army to lose the opportunity to fight. And now, it was time to make up for his mistakes. If he ignored all the soldiers of the foreign race's first army for his own selfish reasons, even if he could stop Yes Hen in the end, it would still be a failure. He couldn't destroy the entire foreign race's first army for his own selfish reasons. Su Ke's heart was firm. "Okay, I'm still the commander. Carry out my orders." The commander's authority was inviolable. Since Su Ke had said so, Tu Hai and the others had no choice but to carry out his orders. However, they had already thought it through. They would do their best to stop the Walla army from breaking out. If there was a chance, even if both sides suffered losses, they would still try to stop the enemy. The Walla cavalry's charge was still ongoing. Although the war horses couldn't display their usual speed due to the snow, and the pressure from the arrows increased, Bo Muir didn't have any intention of stopping. He knew that if they couldn't break out today, once the 5-star army's 30,000 cavalry arrived tomorrow, it would be even more difficult to retreat. There are still 4 hours before the sky turns dark. The leader will also join us. At that time, we must kill our way out. For this, we must do it no matter the cost. He repeated the importance of this battle to the deputy general beside him. Then, as if he had just remembered something, he asked, "General, how is the situation on the other side?" "General, the news from there is that everything is fine. The 5-star army's cavalry didn't have enough momentum. It seems like they are very afraid of death." When the deputy general answered this question, there was a trace of disdain in the corner of his mouth. Bo Muir could see that this person was looking down on the 5-star army. His expression changed for no reason. "What do you know? The 5-star army isn't afraid of death. They just don't want to pay a huge price. I even suspect that they have already seen through our goal. What? That can't be right. The deputy general had a look of disbelief. There is nothing impossible about it. I have long heard that the 5-star army has a type of metal that can achieve the purpose of rapid communication. In other words, the news of the leader meeting us is very likely to be known to them. Our abnormal attack must have aroused their suspicions. Beau Muir said with a heavy expression. When he first heard about this matter, he still had a look of disbelief. However, the 5-star army's reaction speed on the battlefield had already proven this point. After saying this, Beau Muir didn't look at the deputy general, who was so shocked that his mouth was agape. Instead, he looked back at the map in front of him. He was thinking about whether there were any loopholes in their next move. On the other hand, the attacks of the new army on the west side were indeed not that fierce. With such a thick layer of snow, once they started charging, they would definitely not be able to increase their speed. This allowed the archers, who were on the defensive, to have more space to display their skills. Knowing that it was dangerous and still having the soldiers charge, no general with brains would do such a thing. However, this didn't mean that they wouldn't do anything. It was inevitable for soldiers to be sacrificed on the battlefield, but the most important thing was how to make the most of their value. If they couldn't make enough difference, Su He, Bai Shuang, and the others couldn't accept such a way of dying. I think we should wait until nighttime. Once the first Walla cavalry can't hold on any longer, the Walla army will have to charge out from there. At that time, the 50,000 Walla cavalry will definitely retreat. While they are retreating, we will launch an all-out attack. At that time, even if Yes Hen and the others can escape, we still have to make them stay. No matter what, we have to tear off a piece of meat from them. In the tent, the one who spoke was Bai Shuang. Seeing that he was going to become the commander of an army after the battle, he didn't dare to underestimate his words. Of course, whether or not we can make these 50,000 soldiers stay will ultimately depend on whether or not the first army can seal their pockets. Commander Su, I'll need you to communicate with them about this matter. After Bai Shuang finished explaining the general military plan, he patched up the last loophole, but this time, he looked at Commander Su He. Although Bai Shuang could communicate with the first army of the alien race directly with his current status, because of what happened before, he was likely to take up a new position. It would not be good for him to jump out at this time and give orders. It would give people the impression that he was exercising his authority before he took up the position. After thinking about it, Su He, as the army commander, was more suitable. Su He understood Bai Shuang's intentions and knew that this was for the sake of the big picture. He nodded and said, "Okay, I'll use the radio to contact Senior Colonel Su Ku." He used to address Su Ku as Commander Su, but now that things had changed, it wasn't appropriate to address him as commander, especially in front of Bai Shuang. Instead, it was more appropriate to address him by his rank. Soon, Su He's telegram was sent to the headquarters of the First Army. Su Ku didn't reply immediately after reading the telegram. He was weighing the pros and cons in his mind. However, Tu Hai, the commander of the 301st Regiment, who was beside him, immediately tossed it aside after reading the telegram. With a displeased expression, he said, "We are all military units. What right do you have to order us around?" They didn't think of a way to launch an attack and rendezvous with us to launch a pincer attack. Instead, they wanted us to open up a path and let the enemy's general go just so they could finish off the 50,000 cavalrymen who were left behind to block the road. We can't agree to this kind of thinking. Chapter 1272. Tu Hai's words were naturally to vent the anger in his heart, as well as to speak up for Su Kuda. After all, he was now the favorite of the military chief, with a lot of power and autonomy. Who knew if Bai Shuang would still be the same after he took over? Would he find a chance to get rid of Tu Hai himself and replace him with someone else? This wasn't Tu Hai measuring the stature of a gentleman with his own yardstick. This kind of thing could be said to be the norm. In order to better control the army, most military chiefs wouldn't allow their subordinates to have different opinions. Otherwise, if they really fought a war, how could they unify the command? But no matter what Tu Hai was thinking, Su Keda's demotion from commander to regiment commander was already set in stone. Unless Yang Qindong retracted it, no one could change it. For example, Su Keda now accepted this fact. He was now thinking about how to fight his last battle as a commander. At the very least, he couldn't leave this mess in the hands of his successor, Bai Shuang. Commander 2, what's the situation at the front? Su Keda ignored Tu Hai's complaints and went straight to the heart of the matter. Military chief. When it came to serious matters, Tu Hai didn't dare to be the slightest bit arrogant. He hurriedly replied, right now, the 304th Division is at the front. Commander Kang Biao is personally commanding the formation, but I heard that they also suffered some losses. The Walla cavalry seems to have gone crazy, charging non-stop. They are also using the tip of the arrow formation. If it wasn't for the heavy snow affecting their speed, I'm afraid our losses would be even greater. This wasn't the first time Su Keda had heard such a report. Previously, the 302 ND Division's commander Wan Xiaojiang and the 303 RD Division's commander Sensei Naganabu had both reported to him that the Walla army's attacks were extremely fierce. There were a few times when they almost tore a hole in the front line. The various divisions had also suffered heavy losses. From the looks of it, the Walla army had truly risked their lives this time. It was likely that the First Army alone would not be able to keep them here. Thinking of what Yang Qindong had said in the telegram, deal with the situation as you see fit, Su Keda couldn't help but let out a long sigh. Pass down the order. Tell all divisions to do their best to resist. If they really can't, don't fight them head-on. Let them pass and wait with the new army and other forces to surround the 50,000 Walla army cavalry. Su Keda finally gave the order, but when Tu Hai heard it, he said with a face full of dissatisfaction, why should we? All right, Commander 2, the facts have proven that we can't stop the Walla army from breaking out of the encirclement. Do you really want the first army of the non-humankind to be wiped out? Anger finally appeared on Su Keda's face. Although he was unwilling, he knew that the bigger picture was more important. He also knew that if he didn't act this way, Tu Hai would continue to persuade him, and he was afraid that he would change his mind. Seeing that Su Keda was truly angry, Tu Hai didn't dare to say anything more. He could only stand at attention and salute, then find someone to pass down the order. The resistance of the First Army of the non-humankind became much weaker because of this order. When the news reached Bo Muir's ears, he let out a long sigh. Very good. In less than 2 hours, the sky will be completely dark. The leader will arrive at any time. Send out scouts. Once the leader arrives, immediately guide him to meet up with us. Then, send out the 5,000 death squads to open a path of blood and prepare for the leader's departure. The sky wasn't dark yet, and the wind was even more chilly. However, no one seemed to feel it. Instead, they all stared with wide eyes, waiting for the arrival of the final battle. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, the scouts came back with news. They had already received the leader Yeshen from Turpan. Not only that, General Chao Lu had also arrived with 20,000 cavalry. When he heard that his side had an additional 35,000 cavalry, Bo Muir suddenly had a bold idea. They currently had the advantage in numbers, and the 5th Star Army's 30,000 cavalry reinforcements would only arrive a day later. Then, could they use this opportunity to do something? For example, surround the 5th Star Army and eliminate them? When this idea appeared in Bo Muir's mind, he felt a surge of blood. When the Deputy General asked him if he should send the 5,000 death squads to the battlefield, he didn't immediately reply. General. Seeing that Bo Muir was silent for a long time, the Deputy General couldn't help but call out twice, afraid that he would miss the opportunity to break out of the encirclement. Oh, send them out. Bo Muir's thoughts came back, and he finally gave up on the idea of surrounding the 5th Star Army. Although this plan was indeed very tempting, the strength of the 5th Star Army wasn't to be underestimated. He couldn't guarantee that they would be able to eliminate the 80,000 5th Star Army in a day's time. If they couldn't, once they were entangled, once the 5th Star Army's reinforcements arrived, it would be difficult to escape. And even if they could defeat the 5th Star Army, the Walla army would suffer heavy losses. This wasn't a good deal at all. What they wanted now wasn't to eliminate the 5th Star Army, because they simply couldn't do it. What they wanted was to get away from here. Only in this way could they better develop themselves. This required them to bring out enough elite cavalry to be the cornerstone of their future development. If one more person died here, it would be a huge loss to their future. Putting away the unrealistic thoughts in their hearts, the 5,000 Walla cavalry charged out. They all had the thought of death on their faces as they rode forward with difficulty in the dark night. From time to time, they would wave their swords to block the incoming arrows. Although their speed wasn't fast and they suffered heavy losses, no one retreated. The first army of the outsiders had been fighting for half a day. Seeing another Walla cavalry brigade appear, and not only did they not dodge the arrows, they even dared to shoot back at them. Both sides suffered some losses in a short period of time. They aren't human at all, they aren't afraid of death. Commander Kang Biao of 304 saw the Walla cavalry getting closer and closer and couldn't help but sigh. He had to admit that among the opponents of the 5th Star Army, the Walla cavalry's combat strength had always been superior. Many times, the 5th Star Army had to be very careful when fighting against them, otherwise, they would likely suffer heavy losses. Come, report the situation to the commander. Seeing that the Walla cavalry was getting closer and closer, the shooting would soon turn into a close combat. Kang Biao quickly ordered people to ask for instructions. Should they really fight with them regardless of the losses, or should they open a path for them to pass through? In just a few minutes, the order was passed down. They opened a path for the Walla cavalry to charge through. Obviously, Su Kuda gave up on the idea of both sides suffering heavy losses. He avoided the spearhead and looked for an opportunity to wipe out a portion of the enemy. For some reason, Commander Kang Biao, who received this order, actually felt relieved. He wasn't someone who was afraid of death, but he felt that this kind of fighting method was meaningless. There wouldn't be a true winner in this kind of war, and it would only benefit a third party in the end. The first army of the foreign races finally opened a path for the Walla cavalry to pass through. When the news came, Bo Muir had just met up with Yes Hen and the others. He was overjoyed and took advantage of the cover of the night to rush through the opening. During this process, whether it was Yes Hen or Bo Muir, they didn't mention Tai Qing. It was as if they had forgotten about this person and his 50,000 Walla cavalry. Speaking of which, it wasn't that they were careless or that they really forgot. It was because they knew that there would always be someone left behind to deal with the 5-star army. If they all wanted to retreat, once the 5-star army met up, they would be able to chase after them. This would create more variables for them to escape. As a result, when a large number of cavalrymen escaped through the gap that the First Army had purposely opened, General Tikian and his nearly 50,000 cavalrymen became miserable. They became children that no one wanted, lone wolves on the grassland. The Walla army's main force escaped without notifying Tai Qing. This news was discovered by the First Army of the foreign races in time. They immediately used the radio to inform the new army and other departments. Su He and the others who received the news were all confused. The Far Eastern Army's 1st Cavalry Division's commander, Dai Kwa, said something that made everyone very alert. Could it be that the Walla army did this on purpose, leaving them to wait for us to surround them and attack them from behind? That's not possible. Hearing this, the other military commanders all had a look of panic and didn't know what to do. Instead, Bai Shuang's eyes quickly spun a few times and suddenly said with some joy, maybe the Walla army is cutting off their tail to survive. They are afraid that we will not let them go, so they intentionally left behind 50,000 cavalry to restrain us. But that's 50,000 cavalry, is Yes Hen really willing to let them go? Su He was somewhat convinced, but also somewhat doubtful. Teacher once said that Yes Hen is an ambitious and ruthless person. This kind of person is willing to sacrifice anyone for his own safety. 50,000 cavalry is very strong, but compared to Yeshen's life, what is it? How about this, I suggest that we join forces with the First Army to surround the 5-star army. However, we don't need to take the initiative to attack. Instead, we can rely on the thick snow to fire arrows from afar and restrain them here. This way, if Yes Hen wants to surround us, we will have the advantage of the terrain and sufficient energy to deal with him. At the same time, we can use the smallest price to persuade the 50,000 Walla cavalry to surrender. Bai Shuang's thoughts turned quickly. At this moment, he had become the commander of an army, so he didn't consider the small matters in front of him, but the big picture. Chapter 1273. Hearing this suggestion, Suhi's eyes also brightened. Good idea. We encircle but don't attack. Once they want to fight back, we are not unprepared. We can only encircle and use bows and arrows to deal with 50,000 cavalrymen from afar. We can achieve the greatest victory with the least cost. I agree. Even Suhi agreed, and several other military officers expressed their opinions one after another, expressing their agreement. A telegram was then sent to Su Ku. Su Ku was originally rejoicing because the Walla cavalry that escaped through the gap he opened was not 50,000 like the telegram said, but 70,000. The sudden appearance of Chao Lu's 20,000 cavalry was something no one expected. Facing so many cavalry, if the first army desperately tried to stop them, they would be in danger of being completely annihilated. In order to save himself, the first army would certainly launch a fierce attack with all their might. In that case, not only the first army of the non-humankind, even the first army of the non-humankind wouldn't be able to defeat a few of them. Yang Qindong had probably thought of this result, which was why he said to deal with it at his discretion. While his heart was palpitating, he received Suhi's telegram. He immediately tightened his pockets and quickly approached the 50,000 Walla army. In less than 2 hours, he had completely surrounded them. At this time, Pai Qin also received news that the Walla's main force had retreated. In his tent, he immediately fainted in anger. After a group of subordinates rescued him, he slowly woke up and cursed, "Bo Muir, you're too weak." Then, he fainted again. When Pai Qin woke up for the third time, the 5-star army had completely surrounded him. Pai Qin's face was pale and he didn't speak. His eyes were empty as he looked forward, as if he had nothing left to live for. He had thought that Bo Muir valued him very much. Not only did he not care that he had been defeated in the previous battle, but he had also taken the initiative to give him 50,000 cavalrymen. This made him feel that he had great power in his hands and was looking down on the world. But who would have thought that in less than a day, he would become an abandoned pawn? At this moment, he finally understood why he was given 50,000 men. It was to lower his guard, and at the same time, it was also a gift to the 5-star army. It was to make them focus on him and not move away. That's right. 50,000 cavalrymen. How tempting. Thinking about the number of troops in his hands, he felt a burst of comical feeling. But on the other hand, if it wasn't for the fact that he had left behind so many soldiers for him, why would he be willing to risk his life here? Even when the sky had turned dark, he didn't rush Bo Muir, but instead kept waiting. Wasn't it because he was confident that someone would abandon him and his 50,000 cavalrymen? But now, it seemed that he was wrong, completely wrong. Now that he had 50,000 soldiers in his hands, he did not have the slightest bit of fighting spirit. He was already someone who had been abandoned. Even if he won the battle, who would see it for? As for declaring himself king, did he think that the 5-star army around him were incompetent? Thinking about the problem of food, he quivered and asked the personal guard beside him, "How much provisions do we have in our army?" "General, this time we came out in a hurry." Previously, General Bo Muir had said that we would retreat at night, so we didn't bring too much provisions. We only have 2 days' worth of provisions. When the personal guard answered this question, his gaze was somewhat evasive. Clearly, he had also thought of a certain possibility. What? Only 2 days? Hearing this result, Pai Qin immediately felt his vision go black, and he fainted again. The 5-star army surrounding them did not know that he had fainted a few times. At this moment, they were setting up an encirclement to prevent the 50,000 Walla cavalrymen from escaping. At this moment, the army urgently rushed to set up barricades. All the caltrops in the army were scattered all over the ground. Strong bows were in hand, and the quiver was full of arrows. They were just waiting to close the door and beat the dogs. According to the analysis of Bai Shuang and the others, the Walla cavalrymen who knew everything would most likely launch a counterattack that night. It would be best if they took action before the five-star army's encirclement was completely solid. This way, the chances of them escaping would be higher. But they never expected that the night would be peaceful. The next morning, the Walla army was still as calm as usual. It was as if they did not know that they were surrounded. Such an abnormality made Su He, Bai Shuang, and Su Ke confused. They could either break out of the encirclement or surrender. But what did they mean by doing nothing? If it wasn't for the scouts using high-powered military binoculars that allowed them to see countless Walla soldiers moving around inside the tent, and if it wasn't for the scouts who reported that the other party had indeed fled far away and was running all the way, it didn't seem like they were going to come back for a surprise attack. Everyone couldn't help but wonder if they had surrounded an empty tent. Since the Walla army was not moving, the five-star army had no reason to move. They only needed to continue waiting. When night fell, Narisong and the 30,000 cavalrymen would arrive. This way, even if the enemy had any ideas, they would be able to deal with them calmly. Unexpectedly, the 50,000 Walla cavalrymen did not move. It was as if they did not know that they were heavily surrounded. In reality, he was already lying on the bed. After being angered to the point of fainting, he was in a deep sleep. Since their commander was not awake, the remaining generals did not know what to do. Soon, there were two different opinions among them. The first was the surrender faction. They believed that the situation had changed, and even their leader didn't want them anymore. Whatever they did now couldn't be considered a betrayal. There were many foreign races and surrendered troops in the five-star army, but weren't they doing well? The second was the fight to the death faction. A man would rather die standing than live kneeling. The only one who died was them. Besides, if the 50,000 cavalrymen charged in the same direction, they would have a chance of survival if they were lucky. However, these two factions did not give way to each other. The surrender faction was waiting for Narisong to wake up. The fight to the death faction considered that they did not have enough manpower. Rushing out like this was no different from courting death. They were also waiting for their commander to wake up and give them orders. In the blink of an eye, 2 days had passed. Narisong's condition did not improve. He was still in a coma and had a high fever. More importantly, the food brought by the army was about to be used up. Apart from a few generals, many soldiers had begun to rely on the snow to fill their stomachs. If this continued, their combat strength would only decrease. However, they did not think of counterattacking when they were in a good condition. Now, they did not have the ability to do so. The 50,000 Walla cavalrymen persisted like this. However, under the encirclement, their every move was under the surveillance of the five-star army. Especially when they saw that they were so hungry that they had to rely on the snow to survive, the five-star army also gave up on the offensive strategy that they were halfway through researching. From the looks of it, they could completely trap the enemy. Since that was the case, why bother to attack? Using this time, the five-star army also rested. Unless they sent out the necessary defensive troops, they also began to hand over the necessary handover. Just like the handover between Su Ke and Bai Shuang. A commander was directly demoted to a regiment commander. Although it was said that he was going to enter the illustrious 1st Cavalry Division, it was still unpleasant to the ears. Thus, Su Ke only gave Bai Shuang all the relevant personnel information and the general situation of the army before leaving. Bai Shuang was also smart enough not to ask any more questions. He was someone who had gained a huge advantage. Right now, anything he said would only embarrass the other party. For the sake of Su Ke's face, he kept his mouth shut. He also handed over some information about the situation of the 4th Regiment to the other party and watched as he left. It was rare for the handover to be so sloppy, but none of the insiders said anything. After Bai Shuang received the information and appointment, he went to the foreign race's first army and met with Tu Hai and the other 3 division commanders. In comparison, Bai Shuang was the youngest. If he had never trained in the army, it would be difficult for him to convince the others even if he had a strong backer. In fact, Tu Hai and the other 3 division commanders were already prepared to take Bai Shuang down a notch. They were already division commanders, but now they actually wanted a regiment commander to lead them. It was impossible to say that they did not have any resistance. However, what surprised everyone was that when Bai Shuang met with the 4 division commanders for the first time, he only used a short sentence to end everything. "In my hand is a telegram personally issued by teacher. This cannot be changed. If anyone is still unconvinced, you can argue with me. You can also apply to leave the foreign race's first army. However, if you still want to stay here, then shut your mouths and perform well. If any of you have any problems, don't blame this commander for not showing mercy. Of course, if your abilities are not bad and you have made contributions, this commander will still be fair in his rewards and punishments. Alright, all of you are dismissed. In the future, use your actions to prove yourselves." This was the first time they had met, and this short sentence left Tu Hai and the others at a loss. They originally prepared some questions, but they were unable to voice them. Didn't Bai Shuang already say that? If you argue with me, then you are applying to leave your current post. Thus, he will grant you your wish. The newly appointed commander would definitely receive Yang Qindong's support. This was without a doubt. Otherwise, how would they carry out their work? Not to mention, Bai Shuang was Bugnam of Gojoseon's student. In terms of relationship, the division commanders were far from him. They wanted to find trouble with Bai Shuang partly because they wanted to cry out for Su Kuda, and partly because they wanted to intimidate Bai Shuang and let him know that he was not strong enough to lead them. In the future, when there were military operations, they should respect their opinions more. However, Bai Shuang did not buy it at all. In an instant, the 4 division commanders looked at each other, shook their heads, and left the tent silently. This matter quickly spread, and even reached the ears of Yang Qindong, who was in the palace of Turpan City. He immediately smiled and said to Beta Persei beside him, "This student of mine is very opinionated. He can also distinguish between priorities. Not bad, not bad." Chapter 1274. To be able to receive 2 compliments from Yang Qindong, Bai Shuang's identity as the army commander was confirmed. At this moment, Yang Qindong was in a very good mood. After crushing the attack of the 5 countries, the 50,000 Walla army cavalry would be in his pocket again. The next step was to wait for the snow to melt before launching an all-out attack. During this period, there were still many things that he needed to do. For example, continuously sending troops to the Ili region, continuously sending the people who wanted to migrate out, and letting the people from the outside bring them in, settling them down, and dividing the land equally, etc. Considering that there were many things to do, and that the war would start again after the spring, he had to stay here to set up the formation. Yang Qindong did not plan to return to Qiqian City. This time, he had to be separated from his wife and children again. Qiqian City. Long residence. The chief of public security, Long Tainan, was drawing Yang Duo's eyebrows in his bedroom. No one would have thought that the dignified Chief Long, who could make criminals tremble in fear, had such a gentle side. A man drawing a woman's eyebrows, this was a sign of the love between husband and wife. See Zhang Chang drawing eyebrows. Zhang Chang was from Pingyang during the Han Dynasty. During the Xian Emperor, he was the governor of the capital. Zhang Chang drawing eyebrows for his wife. In the past, it was said that husband and wife had a good relationship. Later generations combined the story of Zhang Chang drawing eyebrows, Han Shou stealing a woman, Xiang Ru stealing a jade, and Shen Yu's thin waist into the 4 great romantic affairs of the ancient times. Yang Duo, who was middle-aged but still had a beautiful face, was also enjoying this feeling at this moment. From time to time, her eyes would meet with Long Tianan's, and then she would smile. In an instant, the temperature of the entire room seemed to rise a lot. Okay, done. After finishing the last stroke, Long Tai Nan, who was bending over, laughed. Looking carefully in the mirror, Yang Duo's face showed a satisfied expression. Not bad, my husband's skills have improved again. That's true. Who asked me to have a lovely wife? Long Tai Nan laughed heartily after being praised. He was obviously very satisfied with this praise. In response, Yang Duo threw a smug expression, but in her heart, she was happy. Long Tai Nan was not her first wife, and she had a past that she could not bear to look back on. She originally thought that this was the end of her life, but she never thought that she would be able to have a second spring. Moreover, the relationship between the two of them was really good. They loved and respected each other, which made her very satisfied. It was because of this satisfaction, Yang Duo was willing to do anything for Long Tai Nan. Just like how she had sent a telegram to Hu Mang, the commander of the new army in the first city, for the sake of Ai Hui. She didn't know if it was appropriate, but she had done it out of love. Now that she thought about it, she had to inform Long Tai Nan. Otherwise, who knew if it would cause any misunderstandings? Husband, I sent a telegram to Commander Hu Mang yesterday. Oh. What? Long Tai Nan, who was washing his hands after putting down his brush, did not hear clearly at first. He thought that it was just a normal matter, but then he reacted. His hands that were reaching into the basin could not help but pause, and his entire body also froze. Yang Duo, who had been paying attention to Long Tai Nan, noticed this change. A look of heartache flashed in her eyes, and then she said, I recommended Director Qing to Commander Tiger Mane. When the content was said, Long Tai Nan had already turned around. With a trace of nervousness on his face, he said, Madam, how can you send such a telegram? Why can't he? What's this? Director Qing is a talent to begin with. Didn't my husband say more than once that once he wants to lead troops into battle, he is also qualified to be a military commander? And I also know that you went to City Lord Yu Qian and Deputy Commander Leng Song of the Army Headquarters because of this matter. I saw that you were anxious, so I wanted to help you. Yang Duo naturally knew what Long Tai Nan was going to say. It was nothing more than that. It was best for women not to get involved in this matter, especially Yang Duo, who was Yang Qindong's seventh sister. Sometimes, she had to pay special attention to what she said or even what she expressed. How could Yang Duo not know this? A woman's virtue was to have no talent. Wasn't this a sentence that those scholars often said? However, she also knew that they were in Yang Xie's world now. Yang Qindong had said that men and women were equal. Since they were equal, why couldn't she do what men did? More importantly, she saw that Long Tai Nan had been busy because of this matter. She really wanted to help. After thinking about it, she simply sent a telegram to Commander Tiger's Mane in her own name. Of course, Yang Duo wasn't someone who didn't know the importance of things, especially now that Yang Xie's territory was getting bigger and bigger. As Yang Qindong's seventh sister, the weight of her words naturally became heavier and heavier. Therefore, she also specially sent a telegram to Yang Qindong, directly removing Long Tai Nan from the list. She only said that Qin Feng was a good person and a good seedling to be a general. She recommended him out of fairness. Yang Duo only knew that her husband was anxious because of this matter. As for what would happen after these two telegrams were sent, she didn't care. This was the willfulness of women. It was also the willfulness of Yang Qindong's sister. It must be known that even Yang Qindong's wives wouldn't speak about the appointment of a general because this involved a matter of principle, and that was that the harem couldn't interfere with politics. Yang Duo was Yang Qindong's sister. She wouldn't care about such things. She just did what she thought. What could she do? Long Tai Nan was a little speechless by Yang Duo's words. After his expression changed again and again, he finally returned to his previous gentle state and said, well, since the telegram has already been sent, then it's too late to say anything. It's just that Qin Feng is really a talent. Yes, this is a recommendation. Sixth brother should thank me. Yang Duo raised her head proudly and looked as if she was doing this for the public. Long Tainan saw this and could only bitterly smile. He knew that Yang Duo was helping him. How could he refute it? Besides, he was also wholeheartedly dedicated to the public. He was really recommending talents. At least as far as he knew, none of the candidates recommended by the military and the city lord's mansion could compare to Qin Feng. Qin Feng, the head of the operations department of the Ministry of Public Security, was a person with great power in the Ministry of Public Security. At the same time, he was also a young talent that Long Tainan appreciated very much. Despite the great migration, the proportion of natives in the land was very small. However, there were still some people who were unwilling to let the country die and did some small things in private. It was just that because the number of people was limited and the scale wasn't very large, it was naturally not good to send the nearby garrison to deal with this kind of movement. Therefore, this kind of thing was put on the Ministry of Public Security. This made them have an extra unit of the operations department in order to deal with these people who were always restless and would even use weapons to resist Yang Xie's forces. When it was first established, Long Tainan suppressed all the opposing opinions and entrusted Qin Feng, who was only 24 years old, with the heavy responsibility of becoming the head of the operations department. According to the military rank, he was directly given the rank of colonel. Facts also proved that this person didn't disappoint Long Tianan's expectations. In the past 2 years, dozens of big and small attacks eliminated many opposing forces under Yang Xie's forces, giving the people a stable society and space for development. For this, Qin Feng himself also made a lot of contributions and finally received the rank of colonel. This made him in the limelight in the Ministry of Public Security for a while, and he almost reached the height of Long Tainan, the chief. However, he was only less than 20 years old. With this kind of contribution, he couldn't be promoted in the Ministry of Public Security anymore. He couldn't give the position of chief to him. Even if he was a talent, because of the environment, he couldn't be promoted anymore. As a result, Qin Feng, who had made great contributions several times in a row, was given the title of Vice Chief of Public Security. This was already the limit. Because of this, in order to not delay this person's development, Long Tainan decided to send him to the military. This way, there would be room for improvement. This time, it just so happened that the new army was going to be changed into a new army group. Seeing that there were 3 army commander positions, he had an idea. For this matter, Long Tainan threw away his old face and went to look for City Lord Yu Qian, Deputy Commander Ling Song, and the others. Unfortunately, the effect wasn't very good. This didn't mean that Qin Feng wasn't capable enough or that his contributions weren't enough. It was just that he was still too young. If he was allowed to take the position like this, what would happen to the other senior people? Thus, Long Tainan only wrote Qin Feng's name in the recommendation letter from the Ministry of Public Security and then prepared to resign himself to fate. However, everyone knew that it was difficult to obtain such an important position just by relying on the recommendation of the Ministry of Public Security. This was where his worry lay. He didn't expect that Yang Duo would see it all. Then, she made a move. However, she was afraid that she wouldn't get permission, so she acted first and reported later. Originally, Yang Duo was prepared to tell Yang Qindong in person when he returned to Qian City for the new year. However, there was already news that the war in Qian City was tense and he might not return this new year, so she simply sent a telegram to express her intentions. Yang Duo didn't want her husband to worry too much. In addition, Qin Feng was indeed a talent, so she directly sent 2 telegrams in her own name. When the telegrams were received, Yang Qindong just glanced at them and put them aside. He casually said to Beta Persei, "My 7th sister is even recommending talents. Alright, go and check it out later and see who this Qin Feng is." After receiving the order, Beta Persei immediately nodded and went out to send telegrams to Yang Wu, who was staying in Qian City, and Yang San, who was the director of the security bureau. Since it was something that the young master was concerned about, it was not a small matter. In the beginning city, Tiger's Mane, who also received the telegram, revealed a helpless expression. The establishment of a new army was no longer a secret. With the help of the logistics commander, Yang Si, the soldiers had basically gathered, but the commander had not been completely decided yet. This gave Tiger's Mane, who was about to become the commander, a headache. Chapter 1275. Facing the three commanders' positions, the various factions all scrambled to sign up, and there were more than 40 candidates. At this point in time, Yang Shi wasn't as weak as before. His territory was enormous, his population was numerous, and his level of wealth had already arrived at a state that no one could compare to. Because of this, many internal factions had appeared. At first, they just wanted to protect their own interests and strengthen themselves. As they won more and more battles, their territories grew bigger and bigger. Conflicts of interests were inevitable. Among them, a few major forces had enough foundation and could influence many decisions and policies without anyone noticing. The most powerful of these factions were the three factions. The first was the elder faction. For example, Tiger's Mane, the Yang family servants, and some important factory managers and founders. Even though there were not many of them, they all occupied important positions. The second was the Cold Front faction. This was the elite of the elite, equipped with the best weapons and the best soldiers. Their strength was unimaginable. The third was the Red Nest faction. They mainly developed in the rear, acting as the main camp and supporting the development of the army. As Yang Xie developed, it also developed itself. Most of the time, even Yang Qindong had to consider their feelings when making certain decisions. The fourth was the Surrender faction. There were all kinds of talents among them, but it was undeniable that they had all joined the Yang faction from other factions for various reasons. Many of them had been forced to join, but as time passed, they settled down and became Yang Xia, especially the backbone of the 5-star army. There were actually differences among the four major factions. For example, the Crimson faction was also divided into the local faction, the old people in Crimson City, the Great Ming faction, the talents from Northern Ming and Southern Ming, and the foreign faction, the talents from outside Crimson City and Great Ming who came to Crimson City to develop. Apart from this, there were also some smaller factions, such as the Grassland faction, the Vietnamese faction, the Laotian faction, the Korean faction, and so on. It could be imagined that in the future, there would be the Japanese faction, the Ili faction, and many other factions. Yang Qindong was naturally aware of this, but in order to maintain a balanced relationship, he would not interfere unless it was too strong and threatened him. Where there were people, there would be jianghu. Where there were benefits, there would be conflicts. This was something that no one could avoid. And with these relationships, it was impossible to be on good terms with all of them, but generally speaking, he had to get along with them. Just this time alone, almost all the major and minor factions had been mobilized for the position of the three army commanders. As long as there were such talents, they would constantly recommend them. Those who didn't have such talents were also recommended by the other faculties. They agreed to share the benefits. As the commander of an army, how much influence would he have if he obtained this position? How many officer positions would he be able to arrange? Just thinking about it made people envious. Because of this, Tiger's man had the biggest headache. As the new commander of the army, what he needed to do was not to be impartial. He needed to select the best talents and entrust them with important tasks. He also needed to balance the relationships between all parties. At the very least, he could not allow people to criticize him for any major problems. For a moment, he had a headache. But things had to be done. Soon, 2 candidates were submitted. After the review, they were basically approved. They were only waiting for the final order from the army headquarters. They were the 101st Army's commander, Lu Zhua, and the 102nd Army's commander, Ke Lu. Regardless of whether it was in terms of experience or ability, it was obvious to all. If they were promoted, no one would be able to say anything. But no one would have thought that such a problem would still occur. Division Commander Ke Lu was implicated by the new army's commander, Su He. He was given a warning and could not be promoted for half a year. This meant that he would miss this good opportunity. With one less competitor, Tiger's man said that he had one more choice. At this moment, Yang Duo's telegram was delivered to his desk. When this telegram was delivered, there was an attachment. It said that the same telegram was also delivered to Yang Qindong. Tiger's man could not ignore this. Who was Yang Duo? She was the young master's sister. As a servant of the Yang family, she was his master. At the same time, Yang Duo was also the only person from the Yang family that the young master brought to Qiqian City. Just based on this relationship, Tiger's man could not ignore it. Not to mention, the matter had already been reported to Yang Qindong. He did not dare to be careless. I have an impression of this Qin Feng. He was the candidate recommended by the Ministry of Public Security. We have also investigated him. He is quite capable, but he is too young. He is not even 27 years old. Tiger's man looked at the telegram and looked at Qin Feng's name. He could not help but say. Of course, he was not talking to himself. He was talking to Yang Si. They were both servants of the Yang family. Their relationship could not be compared to that of ordinary people. In particular, Yang Si was now the commander of the logistics department. In terms of power and the number of management personnel, he was no less than the commander of the first group. Regarding the important matter of selecting a commander, he called Yang Si over to discuss it. Yang Si did not speak at the moment. Instead, he held his chin and looked at Tiger's man as if he was looking at a rare animal. This kind of gaze had a hint of scrutiny, which immediately made the latter raise his eyebrows. I say, why are you looking at me like that? Are you looking for a kick? In the world, other than Yang Qindong, only Tiger's man could say that to someone like Yang Si that he was looking for a kick. They were both servants of the Yang family. Tiger's man could be said to be the boss and the immediate superior of everyone. Of course, he did not really want to kick anyone. It was just a kind of joke to show intimacy. However, there was a certain degree of pressure. At least, Yang Si, who was afraid of being kicked, immediately became serious. Tiger's man, don't talk about age. Young master is not even 30 years old. This sentence was said by Tiger's man. He was stunned. Yes, Yang Qindong was born in 1430. It would be half a month before he turned 30 years old. Looking at the group of servants, they were not old. None of them were over 30 years old. But which one of them did not hold great power? Yes, we shouldn't judge people based on age. But who are we? How can Qin Feng compare to us? Tiger's man was still a little unconvinced. Yes, Qin Feng can't compare to us, but he won't be too far behind. He was recommended by Miss Seven, and this matter has been reported to the young master. I think we should keep this position for now. If my guess is right, it won't be long before the young master receives news. We just have to wait. As for the last commander position, we have to decide quickly. After all, the three armies can't be without a commander for a day. Yang Si was able to become the logistics commander and manage the relationships between all parties very smoothly. He was a person with a clear mind. That was why he had such an analysis. Naturally, whether it was Tiger's man or Yang Si, with their status, they only had one master in their eyes, and that was Yang Qindong. As long as they served the young master well, they did not have to care about other people's opinions. But the problem was that this was recommended by Yang Duo. Even the young master would have some misgivings, so it was not up to them to think too much. Regarding Yang Si's ability, Hu Mang could be considered to be very familiar with it. Hearing him say this, he nodded and said, okay, since that's the case, we will leave a position. Now, let's discuss the last commander. At the end of December, 1460 was coming. It was only a few days before the 5-star army, and good news came one after another. First, the heavily surrounded 50,000 Walla cavalry finally chose to surrender. Their commander, Taiyin, also died of a serious illness due to his poor health. In the end, his subordinates chose to surrender to the 5-star army. To be able to become Walla's elite cavalry, their strength was very good. As long as they changed their mindset, once they joined the 5-star army, they would definitely be a group of elite soldiers with decent strength. These people did not need to undergo any systematic training at all. As long as they adapted to the military rules of the 5-star army, they would quickly become qualified soldiers. This was equivalent to having an additional 50,000 reserve troops. For the 5-star army that entered the Yilabali area, this was a force that could not be ignored. Second, the scouts had sent back accurate information. Under the leadership of Yeshen, 60,000 Walla cavalry crossed the Altai Mountains and entered the northern grasslands. This kind of decision to leave in a hurry already proved that they were afraid of becoming enemies with the 5-star army. It was believed that as long as this trend continued, they would not dare to become enemies with the 5-star army. This indirectly meant that when the 5-star army conquered the Yilabali area, there would be one less strong opponent. Third, the new army would be officially established a few days later on the 1st of January 1460. The commander of the army, Tiger's Mane, had 3 armies and 1 division directly under him. Each division had 4 divisions, each division had 4 regiments, a total of 33,600 people in each army. The army had about 118,000 combat personnel, logistics personnel, and mechanical personnel. Commander Tiger's Mane, 101st Army Commander Lu Zhua, 102nd Army Commander He Chong, who was selected from countless people. He had served as a squad leader, platoon leader, company commander, battalion commander, and deputy commander in the Cold Vanguard Army. He later served as the deputy chief of staff in the army headquarters, 103rd Army Commander Qin Feng, recommended by Yang Qindong and approved by Yang Qindong, and the new division directly under him, Deng Yu. Fourth, the migration of 2 million people from the Yangtze provinces were entering the first city in batches. From there, they would gradually replace the people in the Yilabali area and become the new owners of the area. Everything seemed to be in order. Yang Qindong's territory was Lufan City. Once this area was occupied, it would become the capital. Now, a lot of boulders and cement were being transported to the city. They were just waiting for spring to start building the city. At this moment, Yang Qindong looked like he was going to go to war and would not stop until he occupied this area. This posture also made Yilabali, Turkmenistan, and Yarqiang very nervous. After the 5-star army failed twice, the Walla cavalry left and the Kazakh army retreated in fear. At this time, they no longer had any outside help. Chapter 1276. Before this, the 5 countries working together did not cause any problems for the 5-star army. Now that there were only 3 countries left, they were even more terrified. Seeing that the 5-star army might launch a large-scale attack, after a series of discussions, the 3 kings decided to ask for help from the Kazakh Khanate. Not only that, but they also asked for help from the Aries dynasty. Needless to say, Kazakh was connected to the Ili region, and they were in danger of dying. After the 3 countries promised to provide grain and a certain amount of gold and silver, even if it was for their own safety, they had to send troops once more. The Aries dynasty was the predecessor of Iran. Under the leadership of Wuzong Hasan, they had just defeated the Black Goat dynasty. They were at the peak of their military strength and wanted to expand outwards. The 3 countries took the initiative to ask for help while paying a certain amount of gold and silver. This was what Wuzong Hasan wanted, and they quickly came to a decision to send troops. King Hasan was born in a Turkmen noble family and believed in the Sunnis. He knew the Qur'an and was familiar with Turkic, Persian, and Arabic. He worshipped martial arts and was brave and smart. Since young, he had ambitions that were different from normal people. At this moment, he had just dealt with the Black Goat dynasty, and his strength was at its peak. The number of cavalry under him had reached 300,000. Raising these troops for nothing was a huge financial burden, but he could not find a suitable target to attack all of a sudden. Now that the 3 countries had sent themselves to his door, how could he not take it? Both sides agreed that after the Aries dynasty opened up, they would move towards the 3 countries and work together to fight the 5-star army. The year 1460 had finally arrived. During the new year, the various troops gathered here. Yang Qindong drank and chatted with the various generals in the palace. This was a rare gathering. Yang Qindong took the opportunity to adjust the deployment of the army and formulate a military plan for the annexation of Yilianli. This time, the higher-ups of the 5-star army who attended the banquet had 5 people. They were the 1st Cavalry Division's Tiger's Man, the new army's commander Su He, Shi Wanshan, the 1st Race's commander Bai Shuang, and the 2nd Race's commander Niu Duo. Apart from that, there was the Mongol Alliance Army's commander Narisong, 30,000 cavalry under him, the 4th Division Ling Feng, the Liaodong 1st Cavalry Division's Dai Qua, and some other direct regiments. All in all, the 5-star army had gathered up to 200,000 troops. This did not include the 150,000 captives from the past few battles and the 100,000 reserve troops sent by Yang Si, the logistics commander of the first city. With these sufficient reserves, no matter which army or division suffered losses in the following battles, they would be able to quickly replenish their losses. This was something that the other powers could not compare to. Not only that, Turpan, Baisbali, and Hobak Seri had nearly 2 million civilians from the other provinces of the Yang family. They were waiting for the 5-star army to take over the new cities and redistribute the new lands after their victory. Taking advantage of the 3 months of continuous heavy snow, Yang Qindong had made all the preparations. He had also accumulated a large amount of military supplies in the 3 cities. Once they were ready, he would be able to wield his troops and be invincible with just one order. Compared to Yang Qindong's ample preparations, the 3 countries did not surrender without a fight. After failing to send envoys to make peace, they also contacted the Kazakh Khanate and the Aries dynasty respectively. The former decided to send 100,000 troops, while the latter sent 150,000. If one added in the troops of the 3 countries, the total number was close to 1 million. Another huge war was unavoidable. In the banquet, everyone only drank and talked, the atmosphere was not bad. On the 2nd day after the banquet, when everyone arrived at the military conference hall in the palace and saw Jean Xian's sand table in front of them, all the military officers' faces turned solemn. Yang Qindong was still dressed in a clean green robe, holding a thin and sturdy pointer in his hand. Before he even opened his mouth, he had already attracted everyone's attention. Generals, our intelligence department received important news a few days ago. The Ili region, Turpan, and Yarkiang tribes have already secretly asked for help from the Kazakh and Aries dynasty. After paying a certain price, they have already persuaded the 2 countries to send 200,000 cavalry to fight a decisive battle with our 5-star army. Apart from this, the 3 countries have each recruited 50,000 soldiers. If we add it all up, our opponents this time are close to 1 million. Yang Qindong's voice resounded in the conference hall. When the generals heard this, their faces all turned red in excitement. Generals who led soldiers to war were not afraid of battle. The more enemies there were, the more merits there would be, and the more opportunities they would have to show off. Seeing the generals' high fighting spirits, Yang Qindong was also very happy. He had not expected the Aries dynasty to suddenly jump out. His original plan was to head west and fight whatever he saw, but he did not know where to start. Now, the Aries dynasty and the Kazakh Khanate had both taken the initiative to jump out. This was the best thing that could happen. Yang Qindong was very satisfied with the general's fighting spirit and morale. He raised the pointer in his hand, and the conference hall immediately became quiet again. This time, we only have more than 200,000 soldiers, and we have to face an opponent that is at least 3 times our number. I want to say that everyone must be cautious and not be arrogant and underestimate the enemy. Of course, the fact is not that scary. We have already investigated. After 2 conscriptions, the men of the 3 countries are all gone. In other words, they do not have the ability to conscript again in a short period of time. However, we are different. We have a solid rear. For now, we have more than 200,000 reserve troops. At the same time, there are 100,000 foreign soldiers from various provinces gathering in the logistics headquarters in the beginning city. They will soon set off for us to be our solid backing. Everyone, there is no need to hold back in the next battle. When you see the enemy, just fight. Beat them fiercely until they surrender. Beat them until they are convinced. As for the inevitable sacrifices in the process, I only want to say that no matter how much you lose, you will be replenished. If a battalion is wiped out, you will take another battalion. If a division is wiped out, you will take another division. In short, you can only advance and not retreat. Those who do not listen to military orders and are afraid of the enemy will be dealt with according to military law. Do you understand? Yang Qindong's face was serious, and his eyes flashed with a cold light. The generals of the 5-star army were all veterans. They should not be afraid of the enemy, but they still had to be clear about the rules. Therefore, when Yang Qindong's cold eyes swept across the crowd, everyone raised their heads, puffed out their chests, and answered loudly, "Understood." Very good. The new army will be the vanguard in the middle, the new 5-star army will be the left vanguard, the first outsider army will be the right vanguard, and your third army will be the vanguard. After the battle begins, all of you will be the vanguard. If you see a city, you can go around it and leave it for the middle army to deal with. In short, charge into the enemy's forces as fast as you can and turn them upside down. Leng Feng's 4th Division, the 1st Cavalry Division, the Mongol Alliance Army, and Liao Dong's 1st Division, Dai Qua, will be in the middle army with me. While supporting the vanguard, you will be in charge of attacking the enemy's cities. The 2nd Outsider Army will be in charge of logistics and backup, and be ready to join the battle at any moment. Orders after orders came out of his mouth. All the generals who were called out stood up straight and answered. The entire meeting room was filled with a sense of nervousness and majesty before a huge battle. 3 Eastern Province. This was a huge province that had just been established half a year ago. It was responsible for protecting Liaodong, developing agriculture, and logistics. As the great general, Yi Ligang had a heavy responsibility. In just half a year, he had clashed with the Baiming army in the Liaodong region more than 10 times. He had suppressed them to the south of the logistics line and ensured that the 5-star army had enough supplies. As a surrendered general, Yi Ligang was entrusted with a heavy responsibility. After obtaining sufficient military and financial power, he also fully demonstrated his talent. After personally commanding several battles, he also established enough prestige in the army of the 3 eastern provinces. In the past 6 months, it was also the happiest 6 months in Yi Ligang's life. He could finally exert his strength without any restrictions. Watching the army become stronger day by day under his own integration, and seeing that the people had food to eat and clothes to wear this winter under Yang Qindong's policy of not collecting agricultural taxes for 2 years, he felt infinite pride in his heart. Wasn't this the life he had always wanted, the life he had always wanted to see? He did not expect it to come true like this. In comparison, looking at the Baiming civilians living outside the 3 eastern province, they were still the same. They did not have enough food and clothes, and they were still suffering. At this moment, Yi Ligang only hoped that Bugnam of Gojoseon could quickly solve the problems in the Ili region and return to Liaodong to save more Han civilians. With such thoughts in his heart, Yi Ligang had been working hard. Together with Governor Lu Ji, they did their best to manage the 3 eastern province and increase their strength. It was the new year. After Yi Ligang paid a visit to Governor Lu Ji in the morning, he returned to his own residence and celebrated the arrival of the new year with the people in the Yi residence. He firmly believed that each year in the future would be better and stronger than the previous year. However, just as the entire residence and city was celebrating, an uninvited guest suddenly appeared outside the Yi residence. Under the lead of the unattractive butler, he came to Yi Ligang's study room. Chapter 1277. At this moment, Yi Ligang's face no longer had the happy smile he had during the new year. There was only a cold expression. Especially after the person was brought in front of him, he said with a frosty expression, "I really didn't expect that Tongji Dai would travel thousands of miles to come to our remote place during the new year. He really put a lot of thought into this." Standing across from Yi Ligang was the Baiming embroidered uniform guards commander, Dai Qing. Dai Qing and Yi Ligang were old acquaintances. In the past, Dai Qing was a small official in the embroidered uniform guard in the new, Gandusi district. Later on, he went to the capital. However, he didn't expect that when he came back, he was already a lower third-rank official. Hearing Yi Ligang's words, Dai Qing's face was filled with displeasure. He was a member of the embroidered uniform guard. During the Great Ming Dynasty, regardless of whether it was the nobility or the ministers, or the commoners, their faces would change at the mention of his name. In the past, Yi Ligang was only an insignificant commander. Seeing him, not only was he not afraid, he even dared to mock him. This made Dai Qing's face very uncomfortable. Following this, he didn't wait for Dai Qing to invite him and found a place to sit. "You can leave first." Looking at the housekeeper standing outside the door, Yi Ligang lightly waved his hand. Although Dai Qing was an unwelcome guest and should have been taken down on the spot, since he had come, Yi Ligang was very curious about what he wanted to say. So what if he left him alive for a while? There were no outsiders in the room. Yi Ligang's face became very serious. "Speak, what business do you have?" Dai Qing didn't mind Yi Ligang's lack of respect. He had already thought about this when he came. Moreover, in the Great Ming Dynasty, the Taijin Guards and the Eastern Faction Guards were very majestic. In reality, they were looked down upon by many people on the righteous path. They could only survive in the darkness and were hated by everyone. However, despite knowing this, Dai Qing still had to come. This was an order from above. If he didn't come, there was only one path left, death. If he came, perhaps there would be a glimmer of hope. "General Yi, let's not beat around the bush. This time, I came on the orders of the emperor to persuade you to turn back." "Oh, that's right, I have a letter that eunuch Gao wrote for you." As he spoke, Dai Qing reached into his bosom and took out a well-wrapped letter before handing it over. The so-called Gao Gonggang was the supervising eunuch of the Baiming Imperial Horse Directorate, Gao Rang. He was also a eunuch with a high position and power. In terms of status, he was second only to Jining. Yi Ligang naturally knew this person. In the past, he would think of ways to give some salary to these supervisor eunuchs during festivals. This was not to say that he wanted to surrender to the other party, but to prevent the other party from finding trouble with him. Who said that she had to do something just because she gave him a gift? It was already very fortunate that these eunuchs were not looking for trouble. Since the other party had written a letter, Yi Ligang opened it with the thought that there was no harm in reading it. He had even thought that he would definitely turn these letters in when he returned. At this time, his heart was completely focused on Yang Xie. Seeing that the people had already seen the hope of a better life, he would not allow anyone to destroy or take back all of this. Yi Ligang held a firm belief in his heart, but after reading this letter, his expression changed again and again. At this time, he was no longer as full of confidence as before. This was because this letter recorded some of the matters of Song Quan's family. Song Quan had once been the commander of the new, Gan capital region and had been Yi Ligang's immediate superior. It could be said that he had taken good care of Yi Ligang. When the 5-star army had arrived at the city walls, he had not hesitated to commit suicide to save Yi Ligang's life and give him a great merit. In Yi Ligang's heart, Song Quan was his blood brother. His blood brother's family was naturally his family, not to mention that he had promised Song Quan before he died. Not to mention that Yi Ligang did not have a family now. Even if he did, if someone threatened him like this, he would not be moved at all. In his heart, there was always a balance. But if it was Song Quan's family, it was very different. He was willing to die for this promise. From this letter, it could be seen that Song Quan's family had been threatened by Gao Rang, or even deeply. If he did not agree to the other party's request, he was afraid that the family would not have a good ending. With the usual style of the embroidered uniform guard, there was no need to say anything about not harming the family. Yi Ligang's expression changed again and again. At this moment, he was somewhat out of his wits. When Dai Qing saw this, a gloomy smile flashed across his face. In this world, everyone had a weakness, and the embroidered uniform guard were people who were good at finding this weakness. Now, he was even more certain that this mission should not be difficult to complete. At this moment, in an adjacent alley outside the Yi residence, the figure of the Yi residence's housekeeper appeared. After making a few turns, he arrived in front of a small courtyard and gently knocked on the door. Then, the door opened and the figure flashed in. Yi Ligang did not know where the housekeeper went, but at this moment, he did not care at all. After carefully reading the letter 3 times, he suddenly raised his head and looked at Dai Qing with a fierce gaze. He said, "What do you want?" This was a negotiation. Dai Qing's face showed a happy expression. He clasped his hands and said, "General Yi, you are the pillar of our Baiming army. You must understand the principle of a fine bird choosing a tree to nest in. This time, eunuch Gao wants you to know the way back and lead the army back to Baiming's embrace. As long as General Yi does this, the emperor will be very happy. At that time, a high position and a good salary will be just around the corner." Dai Qing pretended to congratulate Yi Ligang, as if Yi Ligang was about to soar to the top. But Yi Ligang did not dare to believe a word of this. What emperor's expectation? All of this should be Gao Rang's doing. Using the son of an old friend to threaten people, such a trick could only be done by the embroidered uniform guard and the East faction. But knowing this, how should he choose? If he agreed, he would violate his oath and life goal, and he would betray Yang Qindong's trust in him. If he did not agree, he would betray the dead Song Quan. It was a dilemma, and he could not make a decision. Dai Qing looked at Yi Ligang's hesitation and did not mean to urge him. He was a eunuch with a certain degree of cultural foundation and knew that more haste, less speed. This time, he came to put pressure on the other party, and did not expect to force the other party to speak. This time, he mainly came to inform the other party. He believed that after some time, he should know what to choose. "Okay, the letter has been delivered. I will come back in 3 days. At that time, I hope General Yi can think clearly and make the wisest decision. Goodbye." Dai Qing also knew that this was the territory of the 5-star army. It would be inconvenient for him to stay here for a long time. He did not wait for Yi Ligang to speak and turned to leave after saying this. Just like when he came, Dai Qing deliberately wore a cotton hat. It was a common thing to wear in the cold 3 northeastern provinces, but it could better cover his face. When he walked out of the Yi mansion, he intentionally looked left and right. When he did not find anything out of the ordinary, he walked away with large strides. To be able to become a member of the embroidered uniform guard, he had undergone a certain amount of harsh training. To be able to become a lower 3rd-rank official like the commander, Dai Qing's skills were not bad. However, what he didn't know was that there was always someone stronger. In terms of skills, the people of the 5-star Army's intelligence bureau were not much worse than him. Especially the people of the action team, their abilities were not weak. Just as Dai Qing thought that he had left the Yi residence without anyone noticing and was heading towards the place where he had landed, a commoner carrying firewood was following him from a distance. After following him for 3 streets and seeing him enter an inconspicuous courtyard, he quickly turned around and headed back the way he had come. Not long after, the firewood seller appeared in front of the Yi mansion's housekeeper and another young man. "Manager, I've found the corner. It's a secluded courtyard on the South Street." "Very good, immediately bring people to keep an eye on that place." The young man who was called the manager nodded in satisfaction. Then he said to the housekeeper beside him, "You should go back. You've been out for a long time, don't make people suspicious." "Okay." After the housekeeper agreed, he quickly pushed open the door and left. The manager's eyes flashed with a light. After standing there for a while, he turned around and walked into the depths of the courtyard. Yi Ligang probably didn't know that when Yang Xie gave him this mansion, including the housekeeper and servants, there were many spies. It was still the same saying, don't doubt the people you use, even if you suspect them, use them. Originally, Yi Ligang didn't have a family. His parents and brothers were no longer around. For such a person, how could he not take any precautions when he could use him? Not only was he prepared, but the Yangxia Security Bureau's stronghold in the 3 eastern provinces was near the Yi mansion to prevent any accidents. Unexpectedly, there was actually someone who came to find Yi Ligang. Although the housekeeper didn't know the identity of the other party, the words, Dai Tongji, already exposed a lot of problems. At the very least, this person wasn't a Yang Xie person. From his official position, it was very likely that he was a Baiming official. The manager's surname was Ning and his name was Gang. As the highest level existence of the security bureau in the three eastern provinces, his main purpose was to find out some military information about the Baiming army and to become enemies with the brocade-gowned guards. Yang Qindong had never been careless about the brocade-gowned guards. To be able to become such a notorious existence, whether it was in history or movies, was enough to prove their influence and destructive power. It was because of this that Yang Qindong had long ago entrusted the Wolf Fang Special Forces to send instructors to the Security Bureau and the CIA. A real intelligence officer should be proficient in both the pen and the sword. Especially as Yang Xie's territory grew bigger and bigger, there were likely to be more and more tricks in the dark. He had to be prepared. Chapter 1278. Money and manpower were Yang Qindong's biggest advantages. Whether it was the Security Bureau or the CIA, they had developed strongly over the years, and many outstanding talents had emerged. Ning Gang was one of them. He graduated with excellent results in the graduation examination and stayed with Director Yang San for half a year. After his vision and thinking had been greatly improved, he was finally demoted and became the intelligence director of the Security Bureau in the three eastern provinces. Previously, he had sent people to obtain some military information about the Baiming army through various means. Once, he was even praised by the higher-ups. However, he had never fought with his old rival, the brocade-gowned guards. So, many of the things he learned could not be used. Now that they had finally appeared, Ning Gang was very excited. Ning Gang, who had studied systematically, knew that it was often times like this that he had to remain calm. When he thought of Director Yang San's calm choices in the face of various situations, he forcibly suppressed the urge to arrest them. The founder of the Security Bureau was, without a doubt, Yang Qindong. He had performed many similar tasks in his life and was familiar with this aspect. He selected some selected training, improved it, and handed it over to Tiger's man. Later, Yang Qindong was promoted by the deputy director and learned a lot from Yang Qindong. It could be said that he had completely inherited the mantle. As one of the students that Yang San was very satisfied with, Ning Gang naturally would not be too bad. He knew that the brocade-gowned guards was a powerful organization. Once they appeared, they would not be alone. In order to complete the task, they often did not even form a team. Usually, they would have a backup plan. His task was to find out all the members of the brocade-gowned guards that had appeared. He absolutely could not leave a little bit of trouble behind. If they wanted to do this, they would have to rely on Dai Tongji. At this time, Dai Qing did not know that he was being watched. In the past, he had also come to the Liaodong region for missions and secretly dealt with some disobedient officials. There had never been any problems. Now, these people only had a change of master, but the place had not changed. What was there to be afraid of? Without the slightest precaution, Dai Qing only made a few necessary anti-tracking actions. After finding nothing unusual, he returned to his temporary residence and met the 6 brothers who stayed here. "Sir, you're back. Did everything go well?" Seeing Dai Qing return, a man about 25 or 26 years old with long eyebrows like willows and a jade-like body quickly came up to greet him. This person's surname was Yao and his given name was Shi. He was the person that Dai Qing valued the most. No matter where he went, Dai Qing would bring him along. However, very few people knew that although Dai Qing looked very masculine, he had different preferences from others. This Yao Shi was the person he liked the most. There were many things that he would not tell others, but he would never hide them from Yao Shi. Therefore, he was the only one among the 6 who knew the rough details of the mission. As soon as he saw Yao Shi, Dai Qing's heart skipped a beat. Since he was in a good mood, he naturally spoke more casually. "I've talked to him. There shouldn't be any problems. However, we still need to make another preparation. If he doesn't agree after 3 days, prepare to kidnap him." It doesn't matter if he's dead or alive. This is the consequence of betraying the Baiming. How about this, go inform the other team and have them prepare to act at any time. No matter what, Dai Qing was still a commander in the embroidered uniform guard. There were many people with status who knew him. Although he had disguised himself, it would be best if he did not appear in public. It would save him a lot of trouble. This time, if it wasn't to gain Yi Ligang's trust, he would not have personally come. However, he would never have thought that he had already been exposed. In his opinion, Yi Ligang would definitely not report this matter to the 5-star army for the safety of Song Quan's family. Even if he wanted to report it, it would not be so fast. Therefore, he should be very safe right now. The other operation team had 20 people. They were all highly skilled in martial arts. Once they used force, it would not be a problem for them to kill their way into the Yi residence. However, only Dai Qing and Yao Shi knew about the existence of this small team. It was not convenient for him to appear, so he could only send his confidant. Be careful on the road. This is Bugnam of Gojoseon's territory. Although he did not think there would be any safety issues, Dai Qing still reminded Yao Shi. Yes. Yao Shi agreed with a smile. He then went into the central room and put on a thick coat, wrapping his entire body in it. Seeing that there were no more problems, he left the courtyard under Dai Qing's watchful gaze and headed straight for another settlement. Yao Shi's level was far worse than Dai Qing's. He was only chosen because of his good looks. In terms of professional level, he was too far behind. After he was discharged from the hospital, he only nervously looked around. When he did not see anything special, he went to the location of the other team. Behind him, at least 3 secret agents of the Security Bureau were alternately following him. The sky finally darkened. In the inconspicuous courtyard where Ning Gang lived, a large group of agents of the Security Bureau had already gathered. At this time, each of them had their chests puffed out and their eyes shone brightly as they waited for the final order. After an afternoon of investigation, the group of embroidered uniform guards, a total of 27 people in 2 locations, safely fell into Ning Gang's line of sight. After repeatedly confirming that the embroidered uniform guards did not have any backup plans, Ning Gang decided to make his move. He also wanted to know the purpose of the embroidered uniform guards. Although through ordinary observation, this Yi Ligang was still very trustworthy. However, if something were to happen, it would be better to capture him and personally ask him. Teams 1, 2, 3, and 3 are responsible for capturing people. Teams 4, 5, and 6 are responsible for internal security. In the event of an accident, help at any time. Teams 7, 8, and 9 are responsible for the outermost security. Team 10 is responsible for secretly watching. In the event of an accident, immediately contact the 5-star army stationed in the city and seal off the 4 cities. In short, not a single embroidered uniform guard is allowed to escape. Ning Gang looked at the 10 operation team captains standing in front of him with a trace of killing intent in his eyes as he spoke. A team of 10 people, a total of 100 operation team members. This was the armed force in Ning Gang's hands. Other than that, he also had an intelligence team and a tracking team under him. In the event of a major incident, he also had the authority to mobilize the nearby troops at any time. Ning Gang had mobilized all the operation team members just to capture 27 embroidered uniform guards. This was how careful Ning Gang was. He deeply remembered what Director Yang Qindong had said before. This was also what Bugnam of Gojoseon and Yang Qindong had taught them. As a qualified intelligence officer, succeeding 99 times was not something to be proud of. This was because as long as you failed once, all your previous efforts would be wasted. Therefore, every mission had to be completed with a 100% commitment. Even a lion would use all its strength to catch a rabbit. Each team received the mission and received the blueprints of the 2 courtyards from the intelligence team. After a thorough understanding and a reasonable plan of action, everyone set off at the designated time and went straight to the 2 targets. In the courtyard of the first target, Dai Qing was holding Yao Shi. The 2 hadn't started doing anything yet. They were resting on the side of the bed. Yao Shi tried his best to say nice things to please Dai Qing, but for some reason, the effect was not good today. His backer, who was also his direct superior, was always absent-minded. This was the fundamental quality of a special agent. They were born with an extremely strong sense of danger. For some reason, after dinner, Dai Qing always felt his heartbeat become unstable, as if something big was going to happen. But no matter how he thought about it, he couldn't figure it out. He looked down at Yao Shi, who was still smiling at him in his arms. Dai Qing asked in an absolutely gentle tone, "When you went out today, you didn't notice anything else, right?" "No, what else could there be? No one here will recognize me." Yao Shi shook his head and said innocently. Yao Shi had not joined the embroidered uniform guards for long, and his ancestral home was in the south. In Liaodong, no one knew him. He didn't even have an old friend. So there shouldn't be any problems. Could it be that he was thinking too much? How could Dai Qing know that the problem was him? Instead, he was the one who implicated Yao Shi. Dai Qing couldn't think of a reason, so he stopped thinking about it. Instead, when he looked at Yao Shi, his eyes revealed a fiery expression. Filthy words came out of his mouth, "Little darling, the night is long." Just when he was about to do something, his ears suddenly moved. He seemed to hear a muffled sound in the courtyard. "Who is it?" As expected of a middle-level cadre in the embroidered uniform guards, he instantly exclaimed. Following this shout, the door was suddenly kicked open from the outside. Then, two shadows pounced on him from the left and right. "Aya!" Yao Shi, who had already taken off his shirt, cried out in alarm when he saw this scene. Dai Qing, who was also half-naked, reacted immediately. He grabbed the pillow in his hand and threw it out with a whoosh. Taking advantage of the moment when the headrest was thrown away, his body leaped out like a spirit fox, rushing out of the room and landing in the courtyard. It was when he entered the courtyard that Dai Qing's expression froze. At this time, he noticed that there were 5 men in black standing in front of him. They were surrounding him in a semicircle. "Who are you people?" In his heart, he knew that he had encountered a thief. In front of these bandits who killed without batting an eye, his so-called embroidered uniform guard name might not be useful. So after saying this, he added, "If you are looking for money, I am willing to give you money. Since you are outside, please make things easy." Chapter 1279. Cut the crap. Capture him. I want him alive. The leader of the 5 people was Ning Gang. He was worried about the situation here, so he personally led the team here. At the same time, this was his first time dealing with the Imperial Secret Service, so he wanted to test the other party's strength. When the 4 team members beside him heard the supervisor's words, they rushed forward without another word. However, in order to capture him alive, they abandoned their weapons and rushed forward with their bare hands. What a good Dai Qing! Facing the 4 people rushing at him with a half-naked body, he was fearless. His fist was like the wind as he met them head-on. With a dull thud, the operation team member staggered back 3 steps, revealing an opening. With one punch, he forced an operation team member to retreat. However, Dai Qing's expression also froze. Although he did not use his full strength in that punch, he still used 70% of it. He originally thought that he would be able to send the person flying, but he only retreated 3 steps. It seemed that the other party did not come with good intentions and was not weak. In the blink of an eye, the other 3 team members rushed forward together. For a moment, punches and kicks rained down on Dai Qing's body like a storm. Dai Qing, who protected his head with both hands and his key parts, took several fierce punches. Taking advantage of the opponent's first wave of attacks, before the second wave of attacks came, his body suddenly rushed in one direction. With a mountain lean, he knocked one of the operation team members to the ground. Then, with a long leg sweep, he knocked another team member to the ground. After that, he extended his free hands and smashed towards the last team member. This series of reactions happened in the blink of an eye. The remaining operation team member kept retreating. His hands kept moving in front of him to protect himself, and at the same time, he wanted to dissipate the power of Dai Qing's attacks. After 3 consecutive punches, he still did not knock the opponent down. Dai Qing was anxious. He did not know how many tricks the opponent had. He could not delay and had to end the battle quickly. At that moment, he stopped abruptly. Then, he raised his right leg and kicked the side of the team member's head with great force. Fortunately, the team member was somewhat prepared and protected his head. However, the powerful force still made him retreat continuously. Bang! Dai Qing, who had just finished his kick and was about to rush out, was suddenly knocked down to the ground by a long leg sweep. It was Ning Gang, who had not made a move until now, who had finally made his move. This kick was extremely fast. Dai Qing was unable to react in time and suffered a loss. However, his skills were extraordinary after all, and he had experienced countless life and death battles. Therefore, the moment he fell to the ground, he took the opportunity to roll like a donkey, then flipped over and quickly stood up. Dai Qing had just steadied himself when another fist came crashing down. Out of instinct, Dai Qing countered with a punch. Then, with a muffled bang, a great pain came from his fist. He couldn't help but take 4 steps back before he could stand firm. Needless to say, the one who attacked was Ning Gang. Since his first attack had failed, he would throw another punch. What he wanted was to seize the absolute initiative. After launching a kick and a punch, Ning Gang had already entered the zone. His body was as light as a swallow as he leaped up and launched a chain of 3 kicks at Dai Qing, who was still retreating. Tong tong tong, there were several fierce attacks. When Dai Qing felt that both his arms were in so much pain that he couldn't even lift them up, he suddenly felt a pain in his legs. It was still a long leg sweeping attack. Once again, he was hit and fell to the ground. After falling to the ground twice in a row, Dai Qing's body was no longer as nimble as before. It was impossible for him to stand up in a short time. Taking advantage of this time, the 4 action team members who were repelled by him before pounced on Dai Qing, who was on the ground, like fierce tigers. Soon, his limbs were pressed firmly, and he could no longer move. At this time, the other 2 action team members in the bedroom had already escorted Yao Shi, who was also naked, out. Looking at the performance of the 2 men, Ning Gang, who was still calm and agile just now, couldn't help but stare blankly. Then, he shook his head. At this moment, he already knew what had happened. He couldn't help but feel nauseous. The arrest operation was very smooth. Under the surprise attack, the action team of the Security Bureau suddenly made a move and ended everything in just 2 hours. 13 of the 27 embroidered uniform guards were killed on the spot, 7 were seriously injured, and the other 7 were captured. In the dungeon of the Security Bureau's branch in the 3 eastern provinces, the interrogation had already begun. As the protagonist, Dai Qing was locked up alone in a room. At this time, his eyes were dull. Even now, he still couldn't figure out what the problem was. He didn't suspect Yi Ligong. He had already done his research. He was a man of honor and would never betray him and put Song Quan's family in danger. About an hour passed, and finally, there was a sound outside the prison door. Ning Gang and the others appeared in front of him. The 5 captured embroidered uniform guards were tortured and all of them spoke. However, they didn't know what this person wanted to do. They only knew that it was to complete a secret mission. As for the specific details, they didn't know at all. Therefore, even though they wanted to speak and even talked about many secrets of the embroidered uniform guards, none of them were related to this operation. The final mission still fell on Dai Qing's head. As soon as Ning Gang appeared, Dai Qing raised his head and looked at him with the help of the candlelight. Then, he let out a snort and turned his head to the side. He knew very well that the people outside didn't know about the mission at all. Even Yao Shi had only informed the other party that they were going to take action. They only knew about the general mission and it didn't matter. Seeing Dai Qing's uncooperative behavior, Ning Gang wasn't anxious. On the contrary, he looked at him with interest. Then, he chuckled and said, You don't want to talk, right? It's fine. I hope you can hold on. If you want to kill me, then kill me. I'll still be a good man after 18 years. At this moment, Dai Qing showed a fearless expression. Oh. Still a good man after 18 years? Not bad. But I don't know if you can hold on until then to bring him here. Ning Gang wasn't surprised. If the other party spoke after a simple inquiry, it could only mean that there was no one else in the embroidered uniform guards that could be used. After this shout, the bare-chested Yao Shi was quickly brought over. Then, he was tied to a wooden pillar at the side. When this scene fell into Dai Qing's eyes, a trace of nervousness flashed across his face. And all of this was seen by Ning Gang. This was his trump card. He had already guessed before. Then, he found out from the mouths of the other embroidered uniform guards that Dai Qing and Yao Shi were indeed doing something shameful. He wasn't afraid of the enemy being stubborn. He was only afraid that he couldn't find the enemy's weakness. As long as he found it, it would be time to pry open the enemy's mouth. Yao Shi was tied to the wooden frame. Ning Gang casually sat on a chair. First, he inadvertently glanced at Dai Qing and found that he was looking at Yao Shi with red eyes. Immediately, the corner of his mouth curled up and said, "What are you waiting for? Let's start the torture." No. No. Two consecutive voices came from different mouths. It was Dai Qing and Yao Shi. Yao Shi was afraid, and Dai Qing was worried. Ning Gang wasn't surprised at all by these two people's reactions. He looked at Yao Shi again and said, "You're so delicate. We really don't want to torture you, but there's no other way. Someone has to speak. Why are you here? Otherwise, I won't be able to report back." "Okay, let's not talk nonsense. Let's start the torture." "No." Yao Shi, who was afraid of being tortured, immediately shouted loudly. Then, he looked at Dai Qing and said, "Save me, save me. Didn't you say that you love me very much and are willing to give up everything for me?" If these words were said by a woman to a man, everyone would be able to accept it. After all, love between a man and a woman was a very normal thing. But when it came from a man talking to another man, no matter how handsome the man was, it made people feel a sense of disgust. At this moment, not to mention Ning Gang, even the other people participating in the interrogation hurriedly looked to the side. Obviously, they couldn't accept the reality in front of them. However, at this moment, Dai Qing didn't feel uncomfortable at all. On the contrary, he looked at Yao Shi affectionately with a look of struggle in his eyes. Next, Yao Shi shouted loudly, but Dai Qing didn't speak. He just looked conflicted and reluctant. It's time to add fuel to the fire. Ning Gang thought so in his heart. Then, he said to the torture staff, "What are you waiting for? Since there are people who don't care, let's start the torture." "Yes." A burly man agreed. Then, he raised his right hand and twisted the whip in his hand. When he saw that the whip was about to fall, Dai Qing, who had been silent, couldn't help but shout, "Don't hit, I'll talk, hit the snake where it hurts." However, no one would have thought that Dai Qing's weakness was actually a man. For the sake of Yao Shi, he finally lowered his head. Ning Gang also stood up from his chair and said with satisfaction, "That's right. Well, tell me about your mission here." Dai Qing, who had been wronged, naturally cooperated fully. He told the whole story of how he received the order from eunuch Gao Rang to persuade Yiligang to rebel. It turned out that what happened in Liaodu had made the acting emperor very angry. If they had only lost to the 5-star army in the war, it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, who would only win and not lose in a war? However, he was angry about the performance of the officials, especially the generals, who were originally from New Ergon. Didn't they say that martial artists valued righteousness and scholars despised each other? But why did so many generals and commanders choose to surrender? He couldn't figure it out. At the same time, he decided to punish these people. Otherwise, wouldn't everyone follow suit in the future?